The Lumeris Gate network looked less like a transportation system and more like the nervous system of a god. From the observation deck of the orbital station known as the Crown, the view was enough to bring a vertigo-inducing sense of insignificance to even the most arrogant warlord. Strands of cerulean energy pulsed across the black void, connecting distant star systems in a web of light that defied physics and time. War fleets lurked at the edges of the demilitarized zone, their hulls bristling with kinetic cannons and plasma batteries, waiting like wolves circling a campfire. They were not there to invade, not yet. They were there to escort the suitors. Every news feed from the core worlds to the ragged rim was screaming about the same thing. The holographic anchors called it the event of the millennium. The galactic marriage conclave had begun. Inside the High Council chamber of the Crown, the air was recycled and smelled faintly of sterile ozone and expensive perfume. Queen Eliana sat at the head of a table made from a single slab of black obsidian. She did not move, yet she was the most vibrant thing in the room. Her skin, pale and flawless, was traced with natural bioluminescent markings that shimmered in sync with her emotions. Right now, they were a cool, steady violet, a mask of calm betraying nothing of the headache throbbing behind her eyes. She possessed the psychic gifts of her lineage, eyes that were entirely silver, lacking pupils or irises. Seeing spectra of light and emotion that others could not. She saw the fear sweating off the ambassador from the Keltari Federation. She saw the greedy ambition radiating like heat from the Trade Guild representative. "We must secure the southern quadrant gates," the Keltari ambassador insisted, slamming a fist on the table. "If the Dominion marries into the line, they will strangle our trade routes within 6 months. And if we let the Keltari have access," the Trade Guild representative countered, his voice oily and smooth, "we invite piracy on a galactic scale. The Queen must choose a partner who understands economics, not just war." Eliana shifted slightly. Her violet markings pulsed once, a ripple of light moving down her neck. "Silence," she said. She did not shout. She did not need to. Her voice carried a harmonic resonance that vibrated in the chest of every being in the room. The arguing stopped instantly. "You speak of my marriage as if it were a merger of mining corporations," Eliana said, her silver eyes scanning the faces around the table. "You argue over gate access and trade tariffs. Tell me, Counselor Varric, does the Keltari Federation plan to love the Lumeris throne, or just the hyperspace lanes it controls?" Varric, a man with skin like cracked leather, cleared his throat nervously. "Your Majesty, tradition dictates. Tradition dictates I choose a consort to balance the galactic powers," Eliana interrupted, her tone cutting. "It does not dictate that I enjoy listening to you barter away my life." A slender elder counselor named Alara stepped forward. She was the only one Eliana tolerated with any warmth. "Majesty, the deadline is absolute. The law states that a queen unbound cannot hold the keys to the gate network for more than 1 lunar cycle after her coronation anniversary. That date approaches. If you do not choose, the automated protocols will seal the gates. The galaxy will be cut into isolated pockets. Economies will collapse. War will be inevitable." Eliana looked out the viewport at the swirling nebula that served as the backdrop for the station. She felt the weight of it, a physical pressure on her shoulders. The Lumeris technology was ancient, left by a precursor race, and it required a bonded pair to function at full capacity. She was half a key. She needed a match. "I know the stakes, Ilara," Eliana said softly. "I will choose." But as she dismissed them and watched them file out, her bioluminescence dimmed to a dull, weary gray. She was the most powerful woman in the galaxy. and she was nothing more than a trophy waiting to be claimed by the strongest monster. The arrival of the suitors was designed to be a spectacle of intimidation. The main docking bay of the Crown was a cavernous space, large enough to house a destroyer, polished to a mirror sheen. First came Prince Valerius of the shape-shifting changeling ascendancy. His shuttle was sleek, like a silver needle. When he descended the ramp, he was a towering figure of gold-skinned perfection, flanked by guards who wore faces identical to his own. He paused at the bottom of the ramp, and for a second, his features rippled like water, his jaw widening, his eyes shifting from blue to predatory yellow, before settling back into a handsome mask. It was a reminder. He could be anyone. He could be anywhere. Next came Warlord Kalen of the Iron Legion. His ship was a scarred block of war metal that slammed onto the deck with enough force to shatter the station's structural integrity fields. He walked out encased in gravity-bent armor, plates of dense matter floating inches from his body, held in place by magnetic fields. The air distorted around him. He did not bring diplomats. He brought soldiers who marched in perfect, terrifying unison. Then came Ambassador Sile of the Cyber Union. He did not walk so much as glide, his lower half replaced by a silent anti-grav chassis. His face was a masterpiece of synthetic skin and chrome. His smile perfectly symmetrical, but his eyes were optical sensors that zoomed and focused with mechanical whirs. He represented a collective consciousness that viewed biological emotion as a glitch. Each entrance was grander than the last. Each suitor brought gifts of rare isotopes, captured artworks, and promises of fleets. They postured and preened, their hatred for one another barely contained by the station's neutral status. High above the flight deck, in the maintenance gantries where the air was thick with grease and the hum of ventilation fans, Cassian Ward wiped his hands on a rag that was already black with oil. "Look at them," Cassian muttered, his voice rough with the accent of the Terran fringe colonies, peacocks with nukes. Cassian was human, a species that held little power in the high courts of the galaxy. He was 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and a scar running through his left eyebrow that gave him a permanent look of skepticism. He wore a gray mechanic's jumpsuit stained with fluids from a dozen different starship engines. Around his neck, a sleek metal collar beeped softly, a constant reminder of his status. Indentured Technical Assistant Class 4. His companion, a six-limbed insectoid named Tikak, clicked its mandibles in a sound that translated to amusement. "You are jealous, soft skin," Tikatuk chittered. "They are kings. You are grease monkey. I am not jealous," Cassian said, tossing the rag into a recycling bin. "I am practical. See that gravity armor on the warlord? The field generators are out of sync. If he sneezes too hard, he is going to implode. And the prince? He walks like he is trying to remember which leg goes first. It is all a show." Cassian climbed down a ladder, his magnetic boots clanking against the rungs. He knelt by a malfunctioning docking strut that had jammed during the warlord's aggressive landing. He pulled a hydrospanner from his belt and jammed it into the access panel. "Hey, Ward!" The shout came from the deck supervisor, a red-faced man named Horg. Horg marched over, checking his datapad. "Stop yapping and fix the strut," Horg barked. "We have 3 more delegations landing in the next hour. And tuck your shirt in. You look like you crawled out of a garbage chute." "I basically did," Cassian retorted, not looking up as sparks showered over his hands. "This strut is fused. Tell the warlord to learn how to land a ship without cracking the deck plating." Horg sneered, pointing a thick finger at the collar around Cassian's neck. "Watch your mouth, convict, or I will dock your pay cycle again. You want to buy out that contract, Or do you want to die on this station scrubbing exhaust ports? Cassian's hand froze on the spanner. For a second, the sounds of the docking bay, the hiss of hydraulics, the fanfare of trumpets, faded. Flashback. The smell of burning plastic and ozone. The sky over the colony world of Ferris 4 was choked with black smoke. Cassian was younger, in a uniform that fit him better then. He held a pulse rifle, the grip slick with sweat. Target the structure. The voice in his earpiece screamed, "There are insurgents inside." Cassian looked through his scope. The thermal signature wasn't showing weapons. It was showing small heat signatures, huddled together, crying. "Sir, negative," Cassian said, his voice shaking. "Those are civilians. There are children in there. That is an order." "Sergeant Ward, fire!" Cassian lowered the rifle. "No." The silence that followed was louder than the explosion that destroyed the building anyway, fired by the soldier next to him. Cassian stood amidst the ash, the scream of a child cutting through the static, knowing his life was over. End flashback. Cassian blinked, the memory receding but leaving the taste of ash in his mouth. He looked up at Horg, his eyes hard and dark. "I am fixing it. Horg, just let me work." He turned back to the strut, cranking the bolt with a savage twist, ignoring the pain in his knuckles. He was a ghost in this machine, fixing toys for gods who would not hesitate to burn a world to get what they wanted. 2 hours later, Cassian was hauling a crate of replacement power cells to the upper levels. The service elevators were backed up, so he took a gamble and swiped his keycard on one of the guest lifts. It was technically against regulation, but he was tired, and his leg, an old injury from the war, was aching. The doors slid open. The car was empty, lined with mirrors and velvet. He stepped inside and punched the button for the maintenance level. As the doors began to close, a hand thrust through the gap, the sensors triggered, and the doors slid back open. A figure stepped in. She was wearing a heavy hooded cloak made of some shimmering gray fabric that seemed to absorb the light. Her face was hidden in shadow, but he could see the hem of a dress beneath the cloak that looked like it cost more than his entire home planet. She paused when she saw him, her head tilting slightly. Cassian sighed, leaning against the back wall. "Do not worry, your ladyship. I am just the help. I will not get grease on your velvet." The woman did not speak. She pressed the button for the observation deck, the highest level. The lift began to ascend, smooth and silent. Then, with a violent shudder, it stopped. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the dim red glow of the emergency backup. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," Cassian groaned. He looked up at the ceiling panel. Primary coupling failure. "I told Horg those stabilizers were shot." The woman in the cloak stood perfectly still. "Is it dangerous?" she asked. Her voice was low, melodic, but tight with tension. "Nah," Cassian said, pushing off the wall. "Just inconvenient. We are stuck between the diplomatic level and the royal suites. Give me a second." He pried open the control panel on the wall, using a small multi-tool he kept in his boot. He started messing with the wires. "So," Cassian said, trying to fill the silence, "you here for the meat market?" The woman turned her head. "The meat market? The conclave," Cassian said, twisting a wire. "The big show. Who are you betting on? The shifter? The Tin Man?" "I put 20 credits on the warlord, only because he looks like he would tackle the priest if he loses." The woman let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a gasp of shock. "You speak of them with such disrespect." "Why not?" Cassian sparked 2 wires together. "They are not here for love. They are here for the keys to the highway. And the Queen." She is the biggest fool of them all. The figure stiffened. Why do you say that? Because, Cassian said, frustration mounting as the elevator refused to restart. She thinks she has a choice. She doesn't. She is just a prize in a game rigged by the big houses. If I were her, I would weld the gates shut and tell the whole galaxy to go to hell. The woman stepped closer. She lowered her hood. Cassian froze. The red emergency light caught the bioluminescent markings on her pale skin, violet traceries that swirled around her eyes and down her neck. Her eyes were pools of liquid silver. She was not just a noble. She was the face on every credit chip and news screen in the system. Queen Ileana. Cassian dropped his multi-tool. It clattered loudly on the floor. He straightened up, his heart hammering against his ribs. He instinctively reached for his collar, a gesture of submission, but stopped himself. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice rough. I did not know." Ileana did not look angry. She looked fascinated. She took a step toward him in the cramped space. The smell of engine grease and old sweat mixed with her scent, something like night-blooming flowers and rain. "You would weld the gates shut?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. Cassian swallowed. "I talk too much when I am nervous. Ignore me. I am just a mechanic." "No," Ileana said. "You are the first person in 3 weeks who has spoken to me without trying to sell me a trade agreement." She looked at his jumpsuit, at the grease smudged on his cheek, and finally at the metal collar around his neck. She reached out, her fingers hovering inches from the metal. He could feel the heat of her hand, a strange, tingling sensation that made the hair on his arm stand up. "Does it hurt?" she whispered. "Only when I try to leave," Cassian said, his voice tight. She looked up, meeting his eyes. For a moment, the rank and the species barrier vanished. He saw a woman who was tired, lonely, and terrified. She saw a man who was trapped, angry, and strangely unbroken. "I envy you," she said softly. "You envy the slave collar?" Cassian asked, incredulous. "I envy that you know exactly where your chains are," she replied. "Mine are invisible." The elevator shuddered. The main lights flickered back on, blindingly bright. The moment shattered. The lift began to move. Cassian snatched up his tool, stepping back to the corner, his head bowed. "Forget I said anything," he muttered. Ileana pulled her hood back up, hiding her glowing markings. When the doors opened at the observation deck, she paused before stepping out. "Thank you," she said, not looking back, "for the advice." Then she was gone, leaving Cassian standing alone in the mirrored box, his pulse racing like a runaway reactor. That night, within the sanctuary of her private chambers, Ileana could not sleep. The walls of her room were active flowing screens depicting the calm oceans of her homeworld, but they brought her no peace. She sat in the center of the room, surrounded by hovering holographic displays. She swiped through the dossiers of the suitors. Prince Valerius, accused of infiltrating the government of a rival planet and dismantling it from the inside. 4 million dead in the ensuing civil war. Warlord Kalen, known for orbital bombardments of cities that refused to pay tribute. Ambassador Sile. His consciousness had authorized the reformatting of 3 sentient organic species to improve efficiency. They were monsters, all of them. And she had to take one to her bed and give him half the keys to the universe. She closed her eyes, seeking the comfort of the throne mind, the ancient AI interface that connected her to the gate network. Usually, it was a calm hum in the back of her head. Tonight, it was turbulent. A microvision flashed behind her eyelids. It was jarring and sharp. Fire. The roar of a crowd screaming in anger, a hand gripping hers, not a claw, not a metallic pincer. A human hand, scarred, with grease under the fingernails. She felt a surge of terrifying adrenaline, and beneath it, a profound anchoring safety. She gasped, snapping her eyes open. The vision faded, leaving her trembling. A human? It was impossible. Humans were a Tier 3 species, barely tolerated in the core. They were laborers, mercenaries, mechanics. She touched her own throat, remembering the heat of the mechanic's skin in the elevator. Cassian. He had been rude, abrasive, and utterly unafraid of her. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. It was just stress. She had a duty, and duty did not care about the warmth of a mechanic's eyes. The opening ceremony was held in the great hall of the conclave station. It was a masterpiece of engineering. The floor was transparent, looking directly down into the swirling purple and gold nebula that the station orbited. Floating anti-grav platforms served as daises for the delegations. Music swelled, a symphonic crash of drums and synthesized strings that shook the air. Eliana sat on her throne, a high-backed chair of white crystal suspended in the center of the room. She wore a gown of woven light, her bioluminescence flaring in a display of regal power. She looked untouchable, a goddess carved from ice and starlight. The suitors approached one by one to present their gifts. Prince Valerius offered a containment unit holding the last living spore of an extinct healing plant. A gift of life, he proclaimed, his voice smooth as silk, though everyone knew his family had caused the extinction in the first place. Warlord Kalen offered the broken banner of a pirate fleet that had harassed Lumeris shipping. A gift of protection, he rumbled, his armor humming with suppressed power. Ambassador Sile offered a data shard containing the cure for a genetic plague affecting the outer colonies. A gift of perfection, the machine man said. Eliana accepted them all with a gracious nod, her face a mask. Internally, she felt sick. They were buying her. They were bidding on her like livestock, high in the shadows of the upper ventilation rig. Cassian lay on his stomach, watching through a grate. He was supposed to be monitoring the atmospheric recyclers, ensuring the massive crowd didn't use up all the oxygen. He adjusted his scope, zooming in on Eliana. She looked magnificent, and she looked miserable. He saw the tightness in her jaw, the way her hand gripped the armrest of the crystal throne until her knuckles were white. She hates it, he whispered to himself, beside him. Tikadek was eating a protein bar. Do not look at the sun, soft skin. You will go blind. She is not the sun, Cassian murmured. She is just a woman in a very expensive chair. Down below, the ceremony was reaching its climax. The high priest of the conclave was stepping forward to bless the union to come. Then, Cassian saw it. It was a shimmer in the air, near the third floating platform where a minor delegation from the outer rim stood. It wasn't a visual glitch. It was the heat haze distortion of active camouflage. Wait, Cassian muttered. Cassian. He tapped his headset, switching to the thermal view on his visor. 3 small objects were hovering in the empty space. They were hot. Weapons hot. Drones! Cassian shouted into his comms. Security! You have stealth drones in Sector 4. The channel crackled with static. Someone was jamming the frequency. Cassian didn't think. He didn't consider his collar or his rank, or the fact that interrupting the ceremony was a death sentence. He kicked the grate open. Below. Time seemed to slow for Eliana. The psychic warning hit her like a physical blow to the chest, a scream of danger. Death. Now. She began to rise, her hand coming up to shield herself, but the air was thick with ceremonial incense, dulling her senses. She was a fraction of a second too slow. The shimmering air decloaked. 3 sleek black assassin drones materialized, their barrels glowing with charged particle energy. They fired. Ileana saw the bolts coming, She knew, with cold clarity, that she could not dodge them. Then something gray and heavy slammed into her from above. It was not a graceful rescue. It was a collision. A body hit hers with the force of a falling rock, tackling her off the throne. Cassian had swung down from the maintenance rig on a grapple line, timing the swing with desperate precision. He hit the queen, driving her to the floor of the floating platform just as the energy bolt sizzled through the space where her heart had been a millisecond before. One of the bolts grazed Cassian's shoulder. He grunted, a sound of wet tearing, but he didn't let go. He rolled, shielding Ileana's body with his own, pressing her face into the cold floor. "Stay down!" he roared. The hall erupted. Screams, the flash of shield generators coming online. The warlord's gravity guards opened fire, obliterating the drones in a hail of kinetic rounds. Ileana lay pinned beneath the human mechanic. She could smell the ozone of the weapon blast and the copper tang of blood. His blood. She could feel his heart hammering against her chest, a frantic, terrified rhythm. He looked down at her, his face inches from hers. Sweat dripping from his nose. His eyes were wide, dark, and frantic. "You okay?" he gasped. Ileana stared up at him, stunned. The most powerful men in the galaxy were in this room, and the only one who had moved was the man with the slave collar. The medical bay was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the great hall. The walls were white, the lights soft. Cassian sat on the edge of a biobed, his shirt stripped off. A medical droid hovered over his left shoulder, weaving a mesh of blue light over the wound. The particle bolt had carved a deep furrow in his deltoid, cauterizing as it cut. It hurt like hell, but the painkillers were starting to kick in, making the room feel fuzzy. The door hissed open. Cassian started to stand, but a hand motion stopped him. "Sit," Ileana commanded. She walked into the room. She had shed the heavy ceremonial robes and was wearing a simpler tunic of white silk. Her bioluminescence was dim, pulsing a soft, worried blue. She was alone. No guards, no counselors. She stopped in front of him. The droid finished its work and beeped, retreating into the wall. Cassian looked at the floor. "I probably broke protocol. Your Majesty, Horg is going to have my hide. You saved my life," Ileana said. Her voice was not the booming voice of the Queen now. It was the voice of the woman from the elevator. Cassian shrugged, then winced as the movement pulled at his new skin. Reflex. I saw the shimmer. "My security chief says the drones were cloaked with military-grade tech," Ileana said. "He says no one could have seen them. But you did." "I have seen that tech before," Cassian said quietly. "In the war. You learn to look for the ripples." Ileana stepped closer. She reached out, her hand hovering over his bandaged shoulder. She didn't touch the wound, but she touched the skin just above it, her fingertips cool and soft. Cassian stopped breathing. The contact sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with pain. "Why?" she asked. Cassian looked up. "Why what? Why did you do it?" Ileana searched his face, her silver eyes piercing. "You hate the Conclave. You called me a fool. You are bound by a collar to a system that treats you like machinery. You could have stayed in the rafters. You could have let the bolt hit me. It would have freed you, in a way. The chaos would have broken the security locks." Cassian looked at her. He saw the confusion in her alien eyes. She was used to transactions. She was used to people doing things because they wanted something in return. He thought about the child on Ferris 4. He thought about the silence after the explosion. He thought about how tired she had looked in the elevator. He shrugged again, careful this time. Careful. Maybe someone had to see you as more than a prize, he said. The words hung in the air between them. Eliana's breath hitched. Her hand lingered on his shoulder, her thumb brushing the line of his collarbone. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she wasn't seeing a human, or a mechanic, or a subject. She was seeing a man who had thrown his body between her and death without asking for a single credit. Their eyes locked. A spark ignited. It wasn't just gratitude. It was recognition. It was the terrifying realization that they were the only two real people in a galaxy full of ghosts. New, dangerous, and deeply personal. You should rest, Eliana whispered, though she didn't pull her hand away. You should go back to your suitors, Cassian replied, his voice rough. They are probably worried you are damaging your resale value. Eliana laughed. It was a startled, genuine sound. She looked at him with a mixture of amusement and something hotter, something reckless. Let them worry, she said. She turned and walked to the door, pausing as it slid open. Cassian Ward, she said, testing the name on her tongue. Your Majesty, he nodded. She looked back at him one last time, her markings flaring a bright, intense violet. Do not die on me. Mechanic, that is an order. The door closed, leaving Cassian alone in the silence, his shoulder throbbing, his heart beating a rhythm that sounded suspiciously like hope. The council chamber vibrated with the impotent rage of powerful men terrified of looking weak. It had been 12 hours since the assassination attempt, and the blame was being fired in every direction except the right one. It was the servants, Councillor Varric shouted. His leather-like skin flushed a deep, ugly maroon. We must purge the lower decks, the maintenance staff, the cooks, the cleaning drones. One of them let the drones in. It was the Outer Rim delegations. Another councillor spat back. The Keltari are trying to destabilize the conclave before the marriage can take place. Queen Eliana sat at the head of the obsidian table, her face a mask of porcelain stillness. Her bioluminescent markings were dialed down to a faint, steady white, concealing the storm of suspicion churning beneath her composure. She listened to them bicker about security protocols and background checks for janitors, and she knew they were wrong. The drones had used spectral shift camouflage. That was military-grade technology restricted to the High Guard and the personal armories of the great houses. A janitor did not smuggle a spectral shift drone past the sensors. Someone at this table, or someone they answered to, had opened the door. Silence, Eliana said. The word was soft, but it cut through the shouting like a laser through silk. We will not purge the lower decks, she continued, her silver eyes sweeping the room. You wish to punish those who scrub the floors because you failed to secure the ceiling. The investigation will be handled by my personal guard, independent of the council security grid. But Your Majesty, Varric protested, spluttering. That is unprecedented. The council nearly let their queen die on live broadcast, Eliana interrupted, her voice devoid of warmth. Do not speak to me of precedent. Dismissed. As they filed out, muttering and casting fearful glances at her. Eliana remained in her chair. She felt a profound, aching isolation. They did not care that she had almost died. They only cared that the asset, the key to the stargates, had almost been damaged. 5 levels down, in the cramped, grease-smelling office of the maintenance supervisor, the mood was less political and more brutal. Cassian Ward stood with his back to a rusted locker, his arms crossed. His shoulder was stiff under the fresh bandages. The burn from the particle bolt a dull, throbbing reminder of his stupidity. Horg, the supervisor, was leaning across his desk, his face purple with screaming. "You are lucky the security chief decided to bury this," Horg hissed, spitting flecks of saliva onto the metal desk. "You broke protocol. You left your post. You engaged with the nobility." "I saved her life," Cassian said, his voice flat. "I do not care if you saved the galaxy," Horg slammed his fist down. "You are a Class 4 technician. You are furniture. Ward, furniture does not jump off balconies. Furniture does not tackle queens." Horg took a breath, calming himself with visible effort. "Listen to me carefully. The official report says a security malfunction caused the drone breach, and the Royal Guard neutralized the threat. You were not there. You did not do anything. If you breathe a word of this to the press, if you try to sell your story to a tabloid, the council will revoke your parole. They will ship you to the penal colony on Titan so fast your head will spin. You will be chipping ice until your lungs freeze. Do you understand?" Cassian touched the metal collar at his throat. It felt heavier today. "I understand," Cassian said. "I am just a mechanic. Get out of my sight," Horg grunted. "And Ward, you are on the roster for the systems check at the psychic arena tomorrow. Try not to play hero again. Next time, they might just let the drone hit you." That night, Eliana did not sleep. The station was quiet, humming with the low frequency of the station-keeping thrusters. But her mind was loud. She sat in her private sanctum, surrounded by the flowing data streams of the Conclave network. She had bypassed the Council's firewalls hours ago. It was a skill she hid from them, a remnant of her training with the Throne Mind AI. They thought her psychic gifts were purely empathic. But the Throne taught its user how to speak to machines as well as minds. She pulled up the personnel file for ID number 7734 Alpha, Cassian Ward. The holographic display flickered, resolving into a block of text and video files. She began to read, and as she did, the image of the rough, sarcastic mechanic began to fracture, revealing something far more tragic beneath. Cassian Ward, born, Ferris Colony, enlisted Terran Coalition infantry at age 18. Rank, Sergeant, combat decorations Silver Star, Purple Heart. She swiped the air, scrolling down to the red text at the bottom. Discharge status, dishonorable. Charge, insubordination and refusal to execute a direct order. Eliana frowned. She tapped the attached video file. The hologram expanded, filling the room with the shaky, grainy footage of a helmet cam. The date stamp was 5 years ago. The audio was a cacophony of wind and distant explosions. She saw Cassian, younger, his face streaked with soot. He was standing in front of a crumbling concrete structure. A squad of soldiers stood behind him, weapons raised. "Move aside." "Sergeant," a voice off-camera barked. "Intel confirms insurgents in the basement. Intel is wrong, sir." Cassian's voice crackled, tight with fear but steady as steel. "I checked the thermal. They are non-combatants. Families. This is a combat zone. Ward, step aside or be fired upon." Eliana watched, her breath caught in her throat, as Cassian raised his weapon, not at the enemy, but centering it on the chest of his commanding officer. "I am not letting you kill them," Cassian said. "I am done burying kids." The feed cut to static. Eliana sat back, the silence of her room rushing in to fill the void left by the recording. He had thrown away his career, his freedom, and his reputation to save strangers. He had been branded a traitor and a liability because he had a conscience in a universe that preferred obedience. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, the distance between the royal spire and the maintenance decks vanished. She felt an almost physical ache in the center of her chest, It was a resonance. She knew what it was like to be trapped by duty, to be surrounded by people who viewed morality as a weakness. "He is alone," she whispered to the empty room, "just like me." The desire that curled in her stomach was not just physical, though she could not deny the memory of his heat against hers on the floor of the great hall. It was a desire for connection. She wanted to know the man who would point a rifle at his own captain to save a child. She wanted to know if he could look at her and see the woman beneath the crown, just as he had seen the families beneath the rubble. The first trial of the conclave, the trial of mind, was held in the Psionic Amphitheater. It was a circular arena with tiered seating that rose into the darkness, filled with thousands of spectators from 100 worlds. In the center was a pit of white sand, surrounded by dampening fields designed to contain psychic energy. The premise was simple and cruel. The suitors would step into the field, and the station's telepathic amplifiers would manifest their deepest fears as hyper-realistic illusions. To win, they had to maintain their composure. To rule the galaxy, one had to master one's own terror. Ileana sat in the royal box, watching with a detached mixture of amusement and disgust. Prince Valerius of the Changeling Ascendancy entered first. The field hummed, and suddenly the arena was filled with mirrors, thousands of them. In the reflection, Valerius saw himself fixed in one form, unable to shift, aging and rotting while he screamed. He fell to his knees, clawing at his face, before the safeties kicked in and the illusion vanished. The crowd murmured. The shapeshifter feared mortality. Next was the warlord Kalen. His fear manifested as peace. He stood in a field of flowers, stripped of his armor, holding a child's toy. He looked around in panic, swinging invisible weapons at enemies who were not there, terrified of a universe where he was not needed to kill. He roared and attacked the empty air until the judges disqualified him. It was pathetic. These men wanted to rule the stars, yet they crumbled before their own insecurities. Down in the control pit, beneath the sand level, Cassian was monitoring the power fluctuations. The psychic amplifiers drew a massive amount of energy, and the conduits were running hot. "Steady the output on emitter 3, Cassian told Tic-Tac, who was working the console beside him. "If it spikes, we are going to fry the neural pathways of everyone in the front row." "I am trying. Soft skin." Tic-Tac chittered. "The energy return is chaotic. The fear is tasty." "Do not eat the fear," Cassian muttered, tapping a command into his datapad. "Just keep the voltage stable." Above them, Ambassador Sile, the cyborg, was in the ring. His fear was a computer virus, a logic loop that stripped away his programming. He froze, his optical sensors whirling wildly as he rebooted. Then, the accident happened. A surge of feedback pulsed from Xilo's cybernetic brain, colliding with the amplifiers. A spark jumped the containment gap, arcing down into the control pit. Cassian felt the hair on his arm stand up. "Get back," he yelled, shoving Tic-Tac away from the console. The arc of blue energy hit Cassian. It didn't burn him, it grabbed him. The world dissolved. The control pit, the smell of ozone, the chatter of the insectoid, it all vanished. Cassian was standing in the dark. Cold wind whipped at his face. The smell of wet concrete and old blood filled his nose. He wasn't in the station anymore. He was back on Ferris 4. Ileana, watching from the box, gasped. The holographic projection above the arena, which showed the audience what the suitor was seeing, flickered violently. The image of Xilo's logic loop vanished, replaced by a gritty, shaking reality. A collapsed building, rain slicking the rubble. The sound of boots crunching on gravel. "Who is that?" a counselor demanded. "That is not the ambassador's mind. It's the technician." Someone realized. The feedback loop caught him. In the arena, Cassian fell to his knees, his hands pressing against an invisible door. "Quiet," he whispered, his voice amplified by the arena speakers so that thousands heard the tremble in it. "Stay quiet. They are coming." On the screen, shadows moved, faceless soldiers with glowing red eyes. They were the monsters of his memory, the authority figures who demanded blood. Ileana stood up, her hands gripping the rail. She felt the psychic wave hit her, not the shallow fear of the suitors, but a deep, oceanic trench of anguish. He was not afraid of dying. He was afraid of failing them. The projection showed what was behind the door Cassian was guarding: huddled shapes, children, refugees, Sergeant Ward. The booming voice of authority echoed in the arena. "Step aside. No!" Cassian groaned, tears streaming down his face in the real world, while his avatar in the mindscape stood like a statue of defiance. "I will not do it." The soldiers raised their rifles. The psychic pressure in the arena spiked to critical levels. The crowd went silent. They were witnessing a man relive the moment he destroyed his own life to save others. It was raw, ugly, and undeniably heroic. Ileana felt his moral clarity like a beacon. It cut through the cynicism of the court. "Stop it!" Ileana shouted. "He is not a contestant. Shut it down." The technicians were scrambling. "When we cannot, Your Majesty." The feedback loop is self-sustaining. If we cut the power now, the shock could lobotomize him. Ileana did not hesitate. She vaulted over the railing of the royal box. She dropped 15 feet, her bioluminescence flaring into blinding white wings of light as she slowed her descent with a telekinetic push. She landed in the sand and sprinted toward the control pit where Cassian was convulsing. She reached him. He was rigid, eyes rolled back, lost in the nightmare. Ileana knelt and placed both hands flat against his chest, directly over his heart. "Cassian," she projected her voice into his mind. "Look at me." The contact was electric. The moment her skin touched his, the barrier between their minds shattered. She was suddenly inside the memory. She stood beside him in the rain on Ferris 4. The soldiers leveled their guns. Cassian turned to her, his face streaked with grime. "Go," he told her in the vision. "It is not safe." "I am not leaving you," she replied. The connection deepened, spiraling past the memory into the raw emotional core of their beings. Ileana felt his attraction to her. It hit her like a wave of heat. She felt the blush he tried to hide, the forbidden thoughts he suppressed every time he looked at her. He wanted to kiss her. Yes, but more than that, he wanted to stand between her and the sharks on the council. He wanted to be the wall that the world broke itself against so she could rest. And in return, Cassian felt her. He felt the crushing weight of the crown. He felt the coldness of her bed and the hollowness of the praise she received. He felt her sensual, desperate longing to be touched, not as a queen, not as a treaty object, but as a woman of flesh and blood. She wanted someone to know her name, not her title. The feedback loop screamed. The combined power of Ileana's psychic mind and Cassian's stubborn will overloaded the amplifiers. With a thunderous crack, the projection shattered. The arena lights blew out, plunging the stadium into darkness for a heartbeat before the emergency amber floods flickered on. Ileana and Cassian gasped, stumbling apart as if physically repelled by the intensity of the bond. Cassian lay on the floor of the pit, heaving for air, sweat soaking his jumpsuit. Ileana knelt in the sand, her hands trembling, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The crowd was stunned into silence. Then, slowly, uncertain applause began to ripple through the stands. They thought it was part of the show, a grand finale where the queen saved the peasant. Cassian looked up at her, his dark eyes wide and terrified. He knew what she had seen. He knew she had felt his desire. Ileana stared back, her face flushed. She had felt his love, and God help her, she had answered it. 2 hours later, the summons came. Cassian was escorted not to the brig, but to observation deck Theta, a secluded spire at the top of the station used for deep space astronomy. It was empty, save for the Queen standing by the viewport, staring out at the galactic rim. The door locked behind him. Cassian stood there, feeling the residual tremors in his hands. He waited. "You are not who you say you are," Ileana said, not turning around. "I am exactly who I say I am," Cassian replied, his voice raspy. "A mechanic with a bad record. You are a soldier who defied an empire." Ileana turned. Her light was soft now, a swirling mix of blue and violet. "And you are a liar. You pretend to be simple. You pretend to be cynical. But I was in your head, Cassian. I saw what you are." Cassian stepped forward, anger flaring to mask his vulnerability. "And I was in yours," he shot back. "You pretend to be ice. You pretend you do not care about the games they play. But you are terrified. You are drowning in that throne." Ileana's eyes narrowed. "Do not presume to know my burdens. I do not have to presume. I felt them." Cassian paced the small room, agitated. "You are playing with people's lives, Ileana. And I do not mean the suitors, I mean me. You pulled me into that arena. You dove into my head. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To have a goddess rummaging through your dirty laundry? I saved your mind from fracturing." Ileana stepped close to him, the distance closing rapidly. "Why did you fight the simulation? Why didn't you just let the fear win like the others?" "Because I do not bow to fear," Cassian said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "And neither do you. That is why you are angry. Because you saw someone who refuses to kneel, and it reminded you that you have been kneeling to that council for 10 years. The truth of it hung in the air like smoke." Ileana stared at him, her chest heaving. The argument had stripped away the protocol. They were just a man and a woman, shouting at the edge of the universe. "Why?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Why did you risk yourself for me? In the hall? In the arena? Why do you care?" Cassian looked at her. He looked at the pulse of light at her throat. He looked at the lips that had whispered in his mind. "Because from the moment I saw you trapped in that elevator," he said softly, "all I wanted was to see you free." Ileana stopped breathing. The admission was more intimate than any touch. She reached out, her hand moving slowly, almost against her will. Her fingers brushed the metal collar at his throat, then moved up to touch the rough stubble on his jaw. It was a possessive gesture, claiming him. "You are dangerous, Cassian Ward," she whispered. Cassian shuddered at her touch. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. He could kiss her. He could lean in and kiss the Queen of Lumeris, and she would let him. He forced a crooked grin onto his face, breaking the spell before it consumed them both. "I am the least impressive contestant in the galaxy, Your Majesty. I do not even have a cape." Ileana froze. Then a laugh bubbled up from her throat. It was genuine, bright, and beautiful. She stepped back, her hand falling from his face, but the warmth remained. "I think I am beginning to like underdogs," she teased, her eyes dancing. The second trial, the trial of flesh, was held 3 days later. The venue was the Zero-G Combat Sphere, a massive transparent globe suspended in the vacuum outside the station. The suitors were armored in pressure suits, armed with shock staves. The goal was simple combat dominance. Cassian was assigned to the external monitoring station, watching the telemetry. He didn't like it. The readings from the gravity generators were fluctuating. "Something is wrong," he muttered to the tech beside him. "The magnetic containment field is cycling too fast." Before the tech could answer, the alarm screamed, "Sabotage." On the sphere, the gravity generators didn't just fail, they reversed. The interior of the sphere began to collapse inward, creating a micro-singularity effect. The suitors were slammed against the walls. The structure groaned, the transparent alloy beginning to crack. If the sphere imploded, it would pull the observation deck and the Queen into the vacuum with it. "Override is locked," the tech screamed. Cassian didn't wait for orders. He grabbed a maintenance tether and kicked off the bulkhead, launching himself into the open vacuum toward the external maintenance hatch of the sphere. "Cassian," the voice was in his head. "Eliana." "I am here," he thought back, the connection instant and clear. "The manual release is inside the service shaft. I have to blow the magnetic locks. The radiation levels are spiking." Eliana's voice was terrified. "You will burn. Better me than you." Cassian gritted his teeth, maneuvering through the debris field. He reached the hatch, wrenching it open. He pulled himself into the service shaft. The heat was intense. The gravity coils were glowing cherry red, ready to detonate. "Guide me," Cassian thought. "I cannot see the circuit relays through the smoke. In the royal box." Eliana closed her eyes, extending her senses. She could feel the station's schematic in her mind. She merged her vision with Cassian's. "Left," she commanded. 3 degrees down. The blue panel. "Rip it out." Cassian obeyed, his hands moving with desperate speed. He tore the panel free. Sparks showered him, burning through his suit, searing his hands. He screamed, a silent sound in the vacuum, but he didn't stop. Cut the yellow wire, bridge the red to the ground. He did it. With a massive shudder, the gravity generator seized and shut down. The singularity dissipated. The sphere stabilized. Cassian floated in the shaft, drifting into unconsciousness, his hands smoking. "I got you," Eliana whispered in his mind, her presence wrapping around him like a blanket. "I have you." The med ward was becoming their second home. Cassian sat on the bed, his hands wrapped in regenerative gel bandages. The pain was a dull thrum now. Eliana was there. She had dismissed the med droids. She stood between his knees, holding his bandaged hands in her own glowing ones. Her bioluminescence was working on a cellular level, her energy knitting his damaged tissue faster than any machine could. "You are an idiot," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I fixed it," Cassian rasped. "You burned your hands. You jumped into a collapsing gravity well." Cassian looked at her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with lingering terror. "I hate it," he said suddenly. "Hate what?" "I hate watching you sit there calm and distant, while everyone treats you like a prize. I hate that they tried to kill you to rig a game. I hate that I cannot do anything but fix the wires after they break them." Eliana's hands tightened on his. "Do you think I like it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Do you think I want this?" Sometimes I fantasize about throwing the entire conclave into a star." She looked down at their joined hands. "I fantasize about running away," she admitted, the confession spilling out, finding a ship, going to the edge of the maps, being with someone who sees me, not the Queen, just Eliana, someone who sees me as more than a crown. She looked up. Her face was inches from his. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the same electricity that had filled the arena. Cassian leaned in. He couldn't help himself. The pull was gravity, inevitable and strong. Eliana leaned to meet him, her eyes fluttering shut, her lips parting. Their breath mingled. He could taste her scent, ozone and starlight. "Stop." He pulled back, inches from her lips. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a prisoner trying to escape. "We cannot." he whispered, his voice broken. If I kiss you, I will not be able to let you go, and they will kill us both. Eliana opened her eyes. They were swimming with unshed tears. She pulled back slowly, the loss of contact physical and painful. She straightened up, composing herself with a visible effort. Her markings flared briefly, then settled into a regal armor-like white. Power without choice, she said softly to the room, is just a prettier kind of cage. She looked at Cassian one last time. Rest, Cassian. Tomorrow, everything changes. Deep in the bowels of the station, in a room shielded from all sensors. The Shadow Council met. She is drifting away from the script. A voice distorted by a vocal masker said, "The human is the cause. The bond between them is becoming problematic. We cannot kill him now," another voice argued. "He is a hero to the lower decks. It would cause a riot. Then we use the conclave," the first voice decided. "We will steer the final trials. We will push her toward a controllable suitor. And the human. We will engineer a situation where he becomes a threat to the Queen's safety. She will have to banish him herself, or watch him be destroyed by her own security grid." The hologram on the table flickered, showing an image of Cassian and Eliana in the med bay, their heads bent close together. "Remove the pawn," the voice said. "Capture the Queen. Checkmate." The conclave flotilla moved through the void like a parade of sharks in formal wear. Leaving the sterile safety of the orbital station, the ships cut a path toward the moon of Orifer, a world that was less a celestial body and more a monument to failure. It was the site of the Great Betrayal, where a peace treaty had been signed and then immediately violated 50 years ago, leaving the moon scarred by orbital bombardment and littered with the wreckage of betrayed fleets. It was a grim setting for a wedding trial, but the council insisted. They claimed it tested the suitor's ability to turn tragedy into triumph. Eliana knew better. It was a testing ground for how well they could lie over the graves of the dead. Inside the royal shuttle, the atmosphere was far from solemn. "Hold still," Eliana said, her voice dancing with suppressed mirth. "You are fidgeting like a child in a temple." "I am not fidgeting," Cassian grumbled, standing stiffly in the center of the cabin. "I am being strangled by aggressive fabric. Who designed this? A spider with a grudge. He was no longer in his grease-stained jumpsuit. By royal decree, and much to the horror of the protocol droids. Eliana had appointed him as her primary technical escort for the surface mission. This meant he had to look the part. He was draped in ceremonial robes of deep midnight blue, embroidered with silver thread that matched the Lumeris royal crest. The collar was high and stiff, forcing him to hold his head up, and a sash of woven silk was tied intricately around his waist. Eliana circled him, adjusting a fold of the heavy cloth. She was dressed for the surface as well, in a fitted bodysuit of white armored weave under a flowing cloak. Practical yet undeniably regal. "It is traditional court attire," she said, tugging the sash tighter. "It is a safety hazard," Cassian countered, trying to loosen the collar with a finger. "If I have to run, I am going to trip, and you will have to explain to the galaxy why your mechanic died of fashion complications." Eliana stepped back to admire her handwork. She tilted her head, her violet markings pulsing with a soft, warm light. The transformation was startling, without the grime and the shapeless jumpsuit. Cassian looked imposing. The dark colors brought out the sharp angles of his jaw and the intensity of his dark eyes. He looked less like a servant and more like a guard dog that had been allowed into the parlor. "You look handsome," she said. The words slipped out before she could check them. Cassian froze. His hands dropped from his collar. He looked at her, and for a second the air in the shuttle grew thin. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice dropping an octave, "do not make fun of the help." "I am not," she replied, holding his gaze. "You look like you belong here." Cassian looked away, flushing slightly. "I belong in an engine room. Eliana, not a parade." The use of her name, stripped of the title, sent a thrill through her. It was becoming a dangerous habit between them, these small rebellions against protocol. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Approaching landing zone. Surface conditions are stable, but atmospheric tension is high. We are detecting ion storms in the upper quadrant." Eliana moved to the window. Below them, Orifer was a bruised sphere of gray rock and green toxic clouds. The scars of the old war were visible from orbit, massive craters that glowed with residual radiation, looking like unblinking eyes staring up at them. "Stay close to me," she told Cassian, her tone shifting from playful to commanding. "The Council says this is a diplomatic mission, but my instincts are screaming that it is a trap." Cassian checked the heavy stun baton strapped to his thigh, the only weapon he was allowed to carry. "I am not going anywhere," he promised. "I am just here to fix the air conditioning if the warlord overheats." The landing zone was a flat plateau of vitrified glass, formed when a plasma lance had melted the desert sand decades ago. A makeshift pavilion had been erected, fluttering in the harsh wind. Waiting for them was the remnant council. These were not the polished politicians of the station. These were the survivors of Orifer, cyborgs with rusted limbs, mutants scarred by fallout, and bitter colony leaders who had spent 50 years living in bunkers. They were angry, they were armed, and they looked at the glittering conclave suitors with open hatred. The diplomatic trial began. The prompt was simple: negotiate access to the moon's subterranean geothermal plants, which the conclave needed to refuel their heavy cruisers. Prince Valerius stepped forward first. He wore a shimmering suit of gold. He smiled, his face shifting subtly to look more trustworthy, his eyes widening in a simulation of empathy. "People of Orifer," he announced, spreading his hands. "The changeling ascendancy offers you credits. We will buy your energy. We will build you new domes, and we will bring you back to the light." The remnant leader, a woman with a cybernetic jaw and one real eye, spat on the glass ground. "We do not want your charity, shapeshifter," she rasped. "Your credits are worthless here. We want the blockade lifted. We want the medicine you embargoed." Warlord Kalen shoved Valerius aside. His gravity armor hummed ominously. "You want strength," Kalen boomed. "Join the Iron Legion to give us the fuel, and I will station a garrison here. No pirate will dare touch you. I offer you protection." "Protection?" the woman laughed, a harsh grating sound. "It was the Iron Legion that bombed us 50 years ago. You offer us the protection of the Butcher." The negotiation was failing. The suitors were arrogant, disconnected. They saw the remnant as resources to be exploited, not people to be understood. The tension in the pavilion was rising. Hands were drifting toward holstered weapons. Eliana stood at the back, watching the disaster unfold. She felt the anger of the locals rolling off them in psychic waves. It tasted like ash and bile. She glanced at Cassian. He was standing stiffly in his robes, watching the remnant leader with a strange expression. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. "Say something," Eliana whispered to him. Cassian blinked. "Me? I am just the technical escort. You are the only one here who knows what it means to be looked at like dirt." Eliana hissed. "Speak to them." Cassian hesitated. Then, he stepped forward, moving past the warlord and the prince. The suitors stared at him in outrage. The remnant leader narrowed her single eye, her hand hovering over a rusted pistol. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Another prince in fancy clothes?" "No," Cassian said. He reached up and undid the top clasp of his stifling collar, letting it hang loose. "I am the guy who fixes the prince's toilet when it backs up." A ripple of confused laughter went through the remnant crowd. "I am not here to offer you credits," Cassian continued, his voice rough and projecting without a microphone. "And I am definitely not here to offer you protection from the people who burned your world." He gestured to the suitors behind him. "These guys? They think you are a puzzle to be solved. They think if they put the right coin in the slot, you will give them what they want. They do not understand that you do not sell the blood of your ancestors for a new dome." The remnant leader's hand dropped from her gun. She took a step forward. "You speak boldly for a servant." "I speak the truth," Cassian said. "You do not want their charity. You want them to admit that they broke this world. You want them to admit that your suffering is real, and that using it as a stage for a marriage contest is an insult." He looked back at Eliana, then turned to the crowd. "If you give them the fuel, make them pay in tech, not credits. Demand the atmospheric scrubbers they use on the station. Demand the medical nanos they use to keep their skin perfect. Make them bleed the things they actually care about. Do not let them buy you with paper." Silence fell over the plateau. The wind howled, whistling through the jagged rocks. The remnant leader looked at Cassian, then at Eliana. "The human speaks with a straight tongue." She grunted. "We will talk, but only to him and only to the queen. The rest of you peacocks can wait in the ship." The suitors were furious. Warlord Kalen looked ready to detonate a gravity well. But Eliana stepped forward, her heart soaring with a fierce, terrifying pride. "Agreed," she said. The sabotage happened an hour later. The negotiations had gone well, or as well as they could. As a gesture of good faith, the remnant leader invited the conclave party to inspect the geothermal vents on the Walk of Echoes, a narrow path winding along the edge of a massive geological fissure. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the glass plains. Eliana walked at the front, with Cassian a step behind her. The suitors trailed, sulking. Eliana felt it before it happened. A spike of malicious intent, sharp as a needle, not from the locals, but from the conclave security detail flanking the rear. "Cassian!" she screamed. The ground exploded. It wasn't a remnant bomb, it was a shaped charge, buried deep in the rock, designed to shear the cliff face away. The world turned into fire and noise. The warlord's gravity armor flared, creating a bubble that protected him and him alone. Prince Valerius shifted into a bird-like form and took to the air, abandoning his delegation. Ambassador Sile magnetized his boots to the stable rock, watching the chaos with cold calculation. None of them reached for the queen. The ground beneath Eliana crumbled. She fell, sliding into the abyss of the fissure. She didn't scream. She reached out with her mind, trying to grab a handhold. But the shock of the explosion had scattered her focus. A hand grabbed her wrist. It was not a psychic construct. It was flesh and bone. Cassian had thrown himself over the edge after her, sliding down the scree, digging his boots into the crumbling rock. He caught her, his grip bruisingly tight. "I have you!" he shouted, his face masked in dust. But the rock he was holding onto gave way. They fell together, tumbling into the dark, the roar of the explosion fading into the rush of wind. They woke to the sound of dripping water. Cassian groaned, rolling onto his side. His body felt like one giant bruise. He coughed, spitting out dust. "Eliana?" he croaked. "Here." The voice was weak. Cassian sat up, ignoring the screaming protest of his left leg. He fumbled for the emergency flare on his belt. but it was smashed. Then, the light bloomed. It started as a soft violet pulse, then expanded. Eliana was sitting a few meters away, her bioluminescence flaring to push back the dark. They were in a cavern, but it was not a dark, wet hole. It was a cathedral. The walls were lined with massive crystals that glowed with an internal rhythmic light. Strange, pale vines draped from the ceiling, their leaves shimmering with iridescent blue veins. The floor was covered in a carpet of moss that gave off a soft, amber warmth. It was surreal, alien, and hauntingly beautiful. "Are you hurt?" Cassian asked, dragging himself toward her. Eliana winced as she shifted. "My shoulder, and my pride." Cassian reached her. He checked her over with the efficiency of a field medic. Her shoulder was dislocated, and she had a nasty cut on her forehead, the blood stark red against her pale skin and the glowing violet markings. "This is going to hurt," he said, putting a hand on her arm. "On 3. 1. 2. He snapped the joint back into place on 2. Eliana cried out a sharp, ragged sound and gripped his forearm hard enough to leave nail marks. "You liar," she gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "You tense up on 3, Cassian said gently. He ripped a strip of silk from his ruined ceremonial sash and began to bind her arm to her chest. He checked his comms. Static. Jammed. He said, "Or we are too deep. The air is getting thin. 2. The recycler in my suit is damaged, and you do not have one." He looked around the cavern. "We need to conserve heat and oxygen." They found a small alcove where the amber moss was thickest, sheltered by a curve of crystal. The temperature was dropping rapidly. The cavern was beautiful, but it was deep underground, and the rock was leaching the heat from their bodies. "Come here," Cassian said. Eliana hesitated for only a second before moving into his arms. They sat huddled against the crystal wall, her back against his chest, his cloak wrapped around both of them. It was an intimacy that shattered every protocol of the conclave. A queen did not sit in the dirt. A queen did not let a mechanic hold her like she was precious cargo. "Your leg," Eliana whispered. "It is bleeding." "It is fine." Cassian lied. "It is not." She turned in his arms, shifting so she was facing him. In the cramped space, she had to straddle his uninjured leg, her knees brushing his hips. The position was incredibly compromising, yet necessary. She reached down, her hands glowing with a soft, healing light. She touched his shin, where the rock had torn through the fabric and flesh. Cassian sucked in a breath. Her touch was not just warm, it was intoxicating. He could feel the pain receding, replaced by a dull, throbbing heat that traveled up his spine. "You have magic hands," he murmured, trying to keep his voice steady. "It is biofeedback," she corrected softly, tearing a piece of her own cloak to bind the wound, a byproduct of the connection to the gate network. "We are bred to be living keys." She finished the bandage and looked up. Their faces were inches apart. The light from the crystals reflected in her silver eyes, making them look like galaxies. She reached up, her thumb brushing a smudge of dirt from his cheek. Her finger lingered at the corner of his lips. "Why do you do it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You hate the royals. You hate the system, yet you jump off cliffs for me." Cassian looked at her. He saw the woman who had stood up to the warlord. He saw the woman who had laughed at his joke in the elevator. "I do not jump for the crown." "Eliana," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and something else. "I jump for the girl who is trapped inside it." Eliana let out a shaky breath. Her hand moved to the back of his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair. The distance between them was vanishing. "I dream about it," she confessed. "Vanishing. just walking away from the throne and the suitors and the duty. But I am afraid. Afraid of what? That I am nothing without it. That if I take off the crown, I am just a girl with weird eyes and too many nightmares. Cassian shook his head. You are the strongest person I have ever met. You carry the weight of a galaxy, and you haven't broken. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. I am terrified of wanting you, he whispered. Why? Because wanting you is like wanting the sun. It is too bright, it is too high. And if I get too close, I will burn. Then burn, she breathed. She tilted her head. Her lips brushed his. It was a feather-light contact, a question asked in the dark. Cassian's resolve crumbled. He gripped her waist, pulling her flush against him. The kiss deepened, becoming desperate. It was a collision of fear and need, a release of weeks of silent tension. She tasted of adrenaline and sweet moss. He tasted of grit and loyalty. For a moment, in the glowing dark of the moon, they were not a queen and a servant. They were just two people clinging to each other at the end of the world. A deep, resonant rumble shook the cavern. They broke apart, gasping, eyes wide. The ground beneath them vibrated. The crystals lining the walls began to pulse, not with a random rhythm, but in perfect sync with their racing hearts. What is that? Cassian asked, reaching for his stun baton. Eliana stared at the crystals. Her eyes went wide, the silver irises swirling. It is singing, she whispered. She stood up, stumbling slightly. She walked toward the largest crystal formation. She placed her hand on it. The light flared blindingly bright. Eliana gasped. Her mind was suddenly flooded with data, not the cold binary of the station's computers, but a warm, ancient stream of consciousness. Traveler, key-bearer, partner. She saw a vision. It projected into the air around them, visible even to Cassian. It showed the galaxy, but the Stargate web was different. It wasn't a rigid hierarchy controlled by Lumeris. It was a flowing, organic network. And standing at the center was not a solitary queen on a throne. It was Eliana. And standing beside her, holding her hand, was a figure in a mechanic's jumpsuit. The paths opened around them, endless and free. It is an anchor point, Eliana realized, her voice filled with awe. This moon, it is not just a graveyard. It is a dormant control node for the ancient network. And it is reacting to us, to you, Cassian corrected. No. Eliana turned to him, the light of the vision reflecting on her face. To us. It requires a bonded pair, not a political match, a true bond. The rumble grew louder. The ceiling began to crack. The vision faded. Reality crashed back in. We have to move, Cassian said, grabbing her uninjured arm. The structural integrity is failing. They were rescued 3 hours later. A rescue team from the remnant, guided by Eliana's psychic beacon, drilled through the rock. When the light of the surface broke through, Cassian and Eliana were standing side by side, covered in dust, battered, but alive. Eliana refused the stretcher. She walked out of the fissure on her own power, leaning heavily on Cassian. The scene at the landing zone was chaotic. The suitors were there, looking pristine and annoyed. They had not lifted a finger to help the rescue effort. Look at them, Prince Valerius sneered as they approached. The queen and her pet, rolling in the dirt. How undignified. Warlord Kalen crossed his arms. You have compromised the purity of the conclave. Eliana, spending the night in a cave with a laborer. The rumors will be devastating. Cassian stepped forward. He was limping. His ceremonial robes were shredded, revealing the jumpsuit and the bandages beneath. He looked like a wreck, but he smiled, and it was a smile full of teeth. You know, Kalen, Cassian drawled, his voice carrying over the wind. You talk a lot about purity for a man who ran away the second a firecracker went off. The warlord bristled. I was securing the perimeter. You were hiding behind a shield, Cassian corrected. While I was catching the queen, he looked at the suitors, his gaze withering. You want to know what happened in that cave? We survived, because that is what leaders do. They survive the dark. They do not fly away to their nests. He turned to Eliana. We are done here, Your Majesty. Let's go home. Eliana looked at him. She saw the fierce protectiveness, the refusal to be shamed. She saw the man who had held her while she cried and kissed her while the earth shook. She looked at the suitors, and for the first time, she did not see powerful rivals. She saw small, frightened children playing dress-up. Yes, she said coolly. Let us go. She took Cassian's arm, not the arm of a servant, but the arm of an escort, and walked past the stunned assembly to the shuttle. Back on the station, the fallout was immediate. The council was in an uproar. The news feeds were running wild with speculation. Queen stranded with human, scandal in the deep. Eliana stood in the center of the council chamber. She had not even changed out of her ruined clothes. She stood tall, coated in moon dust, her eyes burning. It was an accident, Councillor Varric insisted, sweating, a leftover mine from the war. Do not lie to me. Varric, Eliana said quietly. Her voice was not the harmonic boom of the queen. It was the icy whisper of a predator. I felt the intent. I felt the remote detonation signal. Someone tried to bury me on that moon. She slammed her hand onto the obsidian table. You think you can control me by frightened me? You think you can kill the parts of me that are inconvenient? Majesty, Ilara pleaded. We only want what is best for the stability of the realm. You want a puppet, Eliana spat. You want a breeding stock that signs treaties. She turned and walked to the door. I am done playing your game. The conclave continues. But understand this. I will choose. And I will choose based on who can stand beside me in the fire, not who looks best on a coin. She left them in stunned silence, alone in her chambers. Eliana stripped off the armor and the ruined cloak. She stood before the mirror, tracing the line of her shoulder where Cassian had bandaged her. She closed her eyes and replayed the moment in the cave, the heat of his body, the roughness of his hands, the way he had looked at her not as a symbol but as the sun. She felt the memory of the kiss ghost over her lips. It terrified her. It thrilled her. She walked to the viewport, looking out at the vast, uncaring stars. She thought of the vision, the two of them standing together, the galaxy opening up. The council would never allow it. The suitors would declare war. The galaxy would scream in outrage at the idea of a human on the throne. She pressed her hand against the cold glass. If I choose him, she whispered to the silence, the galaxy will burn. A slow, dangerous smile curved her lips, then let it burn. The return to the conclave station was not a triumphal procession. It was a descent into a viper's nest. The atmosphere on the station had shifted from festive anticipation to a toxic, feverish scrutiny. The news feeds were no longer discussing trade agreements or royal lineages. They were discussing the scandal, the image of Queen Eliana emerging from the depths of Orifer, leaning on the arm of a human mechanic, had been broadcast to every system in the civilized galaxy. It had become a viral sensation, but not the kind that bred sympathy. In the lower decks, among the workers and the indentured classes, the image was a symbol of hope. Graffiti began to appear on bulkheads, "The Queen choose us." But in the high spires, in the gilded lounges of the nobility and the encrypted channels of the suitors, it was a joke. A vicious, racist joke. Cassian Ward stood in the mess hall of the maintenance sector, staring at a holographic display projecting from the wall. It was a comedy sketch from a Core World broadcast. An actor dressed in an exaggerated dirty mechanic's jumpsuit was dragging a blow-up doll with a crown around a stage, slipping on banana peels while a laugh track roared. The caption read, "Royal pet requires housebreaking." Cassian watched it with a stone face. Around him, other mechanics ate in silence, glancing at him with a mixture of pity and fear. They knew that being the subject of noble mockery was usually a prelude to disappearing. "Turn it off," Tikadik clicked, his insectoid mandibles twitching in agitation. "Do not watch the static, soft skin. It rots the brain." "It is not static," Cassian said, his voice low. "It is a weather report, and the storm is coming." The storm broke in the High Council chamber an hour later. The meeting was not a consultation. It was an ambush. The councillors were not seated when Eliana entered. They were standing, forming a wall of disapproval. Varric stood at the front, his face a mask of faux concern that barely hid his smugness. "Your Majesty," Varric began without preamble. "The situation has become untenable. The station is rife with rumors. The suitors are threatening to withdraw their fleets. The stock of Lumeris Gate Tech has dropped 15% in the galactic market since your excursion on the moon." Eliana walked past him to her chair, her movements fluid and unhurried. She sat, arranging her silk robes, and looked at them with eyes of cold silver. "Markets fluctuate, Counselor. They will stabilize when I make my choice." "That is precisely the issue," Counselor Alara said, stepping forward. Her voice was shaking slightly. "The lunar cycle ends in 3 days. We have received intelligence that you are harboring sentimental attachments that compromise your judgment." "Sentimental attachments?" Eliana raised an eyebrow. "You mean the man who saved my life when your security failed?" "We mean the human," Varric snapped, dropping the pretense. "Cassian Ward. He is a distraction, a liability. He is a convicted felon from a Tier 3 species. The very fact that he is allowed to breathe the same air as the royalty is an insult to the Iron Legion and the Ascendancy." Eliana's bioluminescence flared, a sharp spike of violet warning. "Be careful, Varric. We have drafted a resolution," Varric pressed on, sliding a data slate across the obsidian table. "It declares that due to emotional compromise, the Council will be appointing a regent to oversee the final selection. Unless, of course, you remove the source of the compromise." Eliana looked at the slate. It was a soft coup. "And what do you propose I do with him?" she asked softly. "Deportation," Varric said. "We have a transport leaving for the Titan penal colony tonight. He will be removed from the station. For his own safety, of course. The warlord has made threats that we cannot ignore." Eliana stared at the slate. She felt the trap closing. If she fought them openly now, they would declare her unfit. If she sent Cassian away, he would be dead before the transport reached the first jump gate. Accidents happened frequently on penal transports. She stood up. The counselors flinched. "You want a selection?" Eliana asked. "You want a final spectacle to satisfy the masses and the markets?" "We want stability," Varric said. "You shall have your spectacle," Eliana declared. 2 nights from now, a grand gala, the display of virtues. Every suitor will have one final chance to prove their worth before the entire conclave. And at the end of the night, I will make my choice. "And the human?" Varric narrowed his eyes. Eliana smiled. It was a smile that did not reach her eyes. "The human is a witness to the assassination attempt on Orifer. By Lumeris law, a material witness to a crime against the crown cannot be deported until the investigation is closed. She tapped her wrist comp, sending a command to the station's central registry. Furthermore, given the security failures of this council, I am exercising my right to appoint a personal technical advisor to oversee the safety of the Gala systems. I have just logged the appointment. Cassian Ward is now a member of the royal household. His safety is bound to mine. If he is harmed, it is an act of treason. The room went deadly silent. Varric's face turned a shade of purple that clashed with his robes. "You are playing a dangerous game. Eliana," he hissed. "I am the queen," she replied, her voice ringing with steel. "I do not play games. I set the rules." The reassignment order hit Cassian's datapad 10 minutes later. He read it twice, standing in the corridor of the maintenance sector. Then he leaned his head against the cold metal wall and exhaled a breath that was half laugh, half curse. "She is insane," he whispered. "She is absolutely beautifully insane." He packed his meager belongings, a change of clothes, his multi-tool, and a faded picture of his parents, and reported to the royal spire. The transition was jarring. He went from the smell of recycled air and grease to the scent of fresh orchids and polished marble. Guards in white armor saluted him as he passed, though their eyes tracked him with suspicion. He found Eliana in a large, mirrored studio on the spire's upper level. Music was playing softly, a complex mathematical rhythm that sounded like rainfall on glass. "You made me a target," Cassian said from the doorway. Eliana turned. She was wearing a practice outfit, her hair tied back. She looked tired, but her eyes were bright. "You were already a target," she said. "Now you are a target with a shield." Cassian walked into the room, his boots clicking on the floor. "Or I am a target standing next to the person they really want to hit." "That too," she admitted. She walked over to a console and adjusted the music. "If you are going to be my technical advisor at the gala, you need to be on the floor. And if you are on the floor, you need to know how to move." Cassian looked at her, then at the mirrored walls. "You are joking." "The Lumeris court dance is a language," Eliana said, walking toward him. "It conveys hierarchy, alliance, and intent. If you stumble, you insult the host. If you turn left when you should turn right, you declare war." "I fix engines." "Eliana," Cassian said, crossing his arms. "I do not dance." "You do today," she said. She took his hand. Her touch was electric, as always. She pulled him into a rigid frame, placing his hand on her waist and lifting her own to his shoulder. "Follow my lead. And for the sake of the galaxy, do not step on my feet." The lesson was a disaster that slowly morphed into something else. At first, Cassian was stiff, awkward, and frustrated. He trampled her toes. He turned the wrong way. He muttered curses in 3 different languages. "Relax." Eliana laughed, a genuine sound that broke the tension. "You are trying to wrestle the music, and you have to listen to it. It is like an engine. It has a rhythm. It has a syncopated beat that makes no sense," Cassian argued, looking down at his feet. "Look at me," Eliana commanded gently. "Not your feet. Look at me." Cassian looked up. Her face was inches from his. The music swelled, a rising tide of strings. He stopped thinking about the steps. He focused on the pulse of light at her throat. He focused on the way her breath hitched when he tightened his grip on her waist. They began to move. It wasn't perfect, but it was fluid. They spun across the floor, the mirrored walls creating an infinite army of queens and mechanics, dancing in the heart of a hostile station. Cassian spun her out and pulled her back. She collided with his chest, breathless. They stopped, but neither let go. "You are learning," she whispered, looking up at him. "I have a good teacher," he replied, his voice husky. The silence stretched, heavy and sweet. The music faded, but they didn't move. Cassian's hand slid up her back, resting between her shoulder blades. Eliana's fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. The banter, the teasing, the political maneuvering, it all fell away. All that was left was the undeniable magnetic pull between two bodies that desperately wanted to occupy the same space. Cassian, Eliana breathed, her gaze dropping to his lips. The door chime buzzed loudly. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers. "Enter," Eliana called out, her voice cracking slightly. A protocol droid rolled in. "Your Majesty, the final fitting for the gala robes is ready, and the council requests your review of the seating chart." Eliana smoothed her hair, her face composing itself into the mask of the queen. "Thank you. I will be there shortly." She looked back at Cassian. The moment was gone, broken by the reality of her crown. "Practice your steps," she said, her voice formal but her eyes soft. "Tomorrow is the longest night of our lives." The night before the gala, the station felt like a bomb waiting for a trigger. Cassian could not sleep in his new quarters. The silk sheets felt like a shroud. He paced the room, the view of the Stargate network mocking him outside the window. He made a decision. He bypassed the security lock on his door, child's play for a former smuggler, and made his way to the Queen's private observation deck. He knew she would be there. She went there when the walls closed in. She was standing by the glass, looking at the fleet of warships gathered in the distance. The warlord's fleet, the prince's fleet, a circle of knives waiting to carve up her legacy. "Cassian," she said, not turning around. "You should be sleeping." "I cannot sleep," he said, walking up to stand beside her. "I keep thinking about tomorrow." "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Terrified," he admitted, "but not of the warlord." He turned to face her. She looked fragile in the starlight, stripped of her armor and her court persona. "I am afraid of what happens after," he said. "Even if we pull this off, even if you name a suitor and the galaxy does not implode, you go to your throne, and I go." "Where? Back to the engine room?" Eliana turned to him. Her eyes were searching his face. "I would never send you back," she said. "Then where do I fit?" Cassian's voice rose, frustration bleeding through. "I am falling in love with you, Eliana, and I am doing it in all the wrong ways. I am falling for the woman who laughs when she steps on my feet. But that woman does not exist tomorrow. Tomorrow, you are the prize, and I am just the guy who fixes the lights so the prize looks shiny." "Cassian, stop," she whispered. "No, I will not stop." He took a step closer. "I resent this. I resent being a pawn in their game. I resent that the only reason I am standing here is because I am useful. I want to be near you. But not like this. Not as a secret. Not as a scandal." Eliana stared at him. The pain in his voice mirrored the ache in her own chest. She moved so fast he didn't have time to react. She shoved him. It was a burst of telekinetic force mixed with physical strength. Cassian stumbled back, hitting the wall of the observation deck with a dull thud. Before he could recover, she was on him. She pinned him against the metal, her hands slamming onto the wall on either side of his neck. Her bioluminescence flared a blinding, furious violet. Her eyes were glowing with psychic power. "You think you are a pawn?" she hissed, her face inches from his. "You think I keep you here because you are useful?" She was trembling, not with fear, but with a raw, consuming intensity. "I am not just drawn to you, Cassian. I am consumed by you. I wake up thinking about your hands. I go to sleep hearing your voice." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper that sent shivers down his spine. "You are the only one who makes me feel like I own my life. When I am with you, I am not the Queen of Lumeris. I am not the key-bearer. I am just me. And that terrifies me more than any fleet." She pressed her body against his. He could feel the heat radiating off her skin, the rapid, frantic beat of her heart. "I want to mark you," she whispered, her gaze devouring him. "I want to walk into that hall tomorrow and tear up the treaties. I want to kiss you in front of the warlord. I want to claim you in front of the prince. I want to watch their faces when they realize that the Queen of the Galaxy chose the wrong species." Cassian's breath caught in his throat. The raw, possessive hunger in her voice ignited something primal in him. He reached out, his hands gripping her waist, pulling her harder against him. "Do it," he rasped. He lowered his forehead to touch hers. Their breathing was ragged, synchronized in the quiet dark. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, his voice shaking, "it changes everything. There is no going back to the engine room." "No," Eliana agreed, closing her eyes and leaning into his touch. "No going back." They pulled apart slowly, teetering on the edge of a cliff they weren't ready to jump off yet. But the promise was made. The air between them crackled with the energy of a star about to go supernova. The grand gala was a masterpiece of excess. The great hall had been transformed into a celestial garden. Anti-grav generators floated islands of exotic flora above the heads of the guests. The floor was a mosaic of light. Every major dignitary from the core to the rim was there, draped in jewels and armor, watching with hungry eyes. Eliana sat on her throne, elevated above the crowd. She wore a gown of liquid silver that shimmered like a captured comet. She looked regal, distant, and utterly untouchable. Cassian stood in the shadows of the tech alcove to the side of the dais, dressed in a formal suit of severe black. He was monitoring the security feeds, but his eyes never left the Queen. The suitors began their final display. Prince Valerius performed a dance of shifting forms, his body flowing from avian grace to predatory power, symbolizing the adaptability of his people. The crowd applauded politely. Warlord Kalen presented a demonstration of martial prowess, his soldiers executing a drill of terrifying precision, their boots thundering in unison. It was a threat disguised as a parade. Ambassador Sile did not perform. He simply projected a holographic schematic of a new trade network, efficient and cold, promising wealth beyond measure. The tension in the room grew with every passing minute. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and desperation. They were waiting for the choice. Eliana stood. The hall went silent. Even the ventilation fans seemed to hold their breath. She descended the steps of the dais. The train of her silver gown flowed behind her like mercury. She walked past Prince Valerius. He puffed out his chest, a confident smile on his lips. She did not look at him. She walked past Warlord Kalen. He straightened, his hand resting on the hilt of his ceremonial blade. She walked past him as if he were a statue. She walked past the ambassador. She kept walking until she reached the edge of the royal circle. She stopped in front of the tech alcove. Cassian stood there, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He looked at her, silently pleading with her to stop, to go back, to save herself. Eliana extended her hand. "Come," she said. Her voice was not amplified, but in the silence of the hall, it carried like a bell. A gasp rippled through the room, a collective intake of breath from 3,000 throats. Cassian hesitated for a fraction of a second. He saw the warlord's hand tighten on his sword. He saw the shock on Varric's face. Then, he stepped out of the shadows. He took her hand. It was warm, steady, and strong. The music changed. Eliana had programmed it herself. It wasn't the bombastic anthem of the conclave. It was the complex, rhythmic piece from their practice session. They began to dance. It was slow. It was intimate. It was a scandalous violation of every protocol in the book. They moved together, bodies close, eyes locked. It wasn't a performance for the crowd. It was a private conversation spoken in movement. Eliana's hand rested on his shoulder, her fingers curling into the fabric of his suit. Cassian's hand was firm on her waist. They spun, oblivious to the sea of outraged faces surrounding them. "I told you," Eliana whispered, a smile touching her lips. "You are getting better." "We are going to die," Cassian whispered back, though he couldn't stop smiling. "Probably." She agreed. But what a way to go. The music ended. They stopped in the center of the hall, still holding hands. The silence was deafening. It was the silence of a dam about to burst. The warlord stepped forward, his face twisting with rage. "This is a mockery. You dance with a servant while kings wait?" Eliana turned to face them. She did not let go of Cassian's hand. She led him up the steps to the central platform. She stood under the spotlight, the full focus of the galaxy upon her. She looked out at the sea of faces, the greedy, the proud, the cruel. "The entire galaxy competed to marry your queen," she said, her voice amplified now, booming through the hall. She looked at the warlord. She looked at the prince. "You offered me fleets. You offered me credits. You offered me power bought with blood." She turned to Cassian. She looked at him with an expression of such open, naked love that it felt like looking at the sun. "But when I chose a human," she said softly, "you all fell silent." She turned back to the crowd, her voice rising to a shout. "I choose Cassian Ward, not because he has a fleet, but because he has courage, because he has empathy, because when the rest of you were hiding behind shields, he jumped into the dark to save me, because he does not worship power, he questions it." She raised their joined hands high. "I declare him my consort. Let the galaxy rage. I have made my choice." For 1 second, there was absolute stillness. Then, the hall erupted. It wasn't just outrage. It was violence. "Treason!" Varric screamed. "Seize them!" the warlord roared, drawing his blade. The hum of the gravity weapon whined into life. The suits of armor lining the walls, the ceremonial guard, suddenly whirred. Their eyes glowed red. They were not moving to protect the queen. They were moving to contain her. Cassian saw it first. He saw the ambassador tapping a command into his wrist comp. "Get down!" Cassian yelled. He tackled Eliana, pulling her behind a massive marble pillar just as the air where she had been standing was scorched by a plasma blast. Chaos unleashed. The nobles screamed and stampeded. The warlord's soldiers opened fire on the royal guards. The drones that had been hovering above the floral displays dropped their camouflage, revealing Gatling lasers. "It's a coup!" Eliana shouted, pressing her hand to her temple. "The throne mind is screaming. They are trying to override the Stargate codes." "Who is?" "The Directorate." It was never just the suitors. It was the council. They rigged the drones. A plasma bolt chipped the marble above their heads, showering them with dust. "We have to get to the hangar," Cassian yelled over the roar of combat. "We need to get off this station." He pulled her up. They were crouching in the debris of the gala. The beautiful illusion was shattered. The flowers were burning. The music was replaced by screams. Amid the chaos, time seemed to freeze for one heartbeat. Eliana looked at Cassian. Her dress was torn. Her hair was wild. She looked terrified, but she also looked more alive than he had ever seen her. She reached for him. Her hand gripped his lapel, pulling him close. "I chose you," she said, her voice fierce. Cassian looked at the woman who had just set the universe on fire for him. "And I am not letting you go," he promised. He grabbed her hand. "Run!" They sprinted away from the throne, diving into the service corridors as the station erupted into full-scale war behind them. The gala was over. The hunt had begun. The service corridors of the Conclave station were not built for royalty. They were narrow, smelling of ozone and recycled dampness. A maze of pipes and conduit clusters that pulsed with the station's lifeblood. Eliana ran. The silver gown that had dazzled the galaxy 10 minutes ago was now a liability. She gathered the heavy, shimmering fabric in one hand. Her other hand gripped tight in Cassian's blackened palm. They scrambled over a cluster of thick cables, their breathing harsh and loud in the confined space. "Left!" Cassian shouted, hauling her around a sharp corner just as a red laser beam scorched the bulkhead where her head had been a second before. 3 security drones whipped around the intersection behind them. They were small, spherical, and fast, their anti-grav engines whining like angry hornets. Eliana spun around, her heels skidding on the metal grate. She didn't have a weapon, but she didn't need one. She thrust her hand out, her palm glowing with a violent violet light. "Stop." It wasn't a request. It was a psychic hammer blow. She directed a concentrated burst of telekinetic static into the drone's sensors. The machines shrieked, their guidance systems overwhelmed by the sheer volume of mental noise. 2 of them collided in midair, shattering into sparks and twisted metal. The third spun wildly, firing blindly into the ceiling before crashing into a steam pipe. Eliana stumbled back, a line of blood trickling from her nose. The effort of using the throne mind's power without the stabilizing focus of the chair was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a teacup. Cassian caught her before she fell. "I got you," he gritted out, pulling her upright. "Keep moving." "We are almost to the old smuggler docks." They sprinted down a long, dimly lit shaft. The station was waking up around them. Alarms blared, a rising, falling wail that signaled a Level 1 containment breach. Blast doors were beginning to slam shut, section by section. "How do you know where we are going?" Eliana gasped, her chest burning. "I used to smuggle stim packs through here before I got caught," Cassian yelled over the klaxons. "There is a blind spot in the sensor grid near Sector 9. If my old contacts are as lazy as I remember, there should be an unregistered courier ship docked there. They reached a rusted airlock." Cassian didn't bother with the keypad. He jammed his multi-tool into the access port and hot-wired the door. It hissed open, revealing a small, dingy hangar bay. Sitting there, looking like a pile of scrap metal held together by hope and duct tape, was a Class 3 courier jumper. It was ugly, scarred, and small. "It is beautiful." Cassian breathed. He shoved Eliana toward the ramp. "Get in. I will override the launch clamps." A squad of elite guards burst into the hangar behind them. They were Warlord Kalen's men, armored in heavy gravity plate. "Halt!" the lead guard roared, raising a kinetic rifle. Cassian didn't halt. He slapped the release on the magnetic clamps and sprinted up the ramp, firing his stun baton at the control panel on the wall to fuse the door controls. Eliana was already in the co-pilot seat when he threw himself into the pilot's chair. The cockpit was cramped, smelling of stale coffee and hot electronics. "Can you fly this?" she asked, strapping in as kinetic rounds pinged off the hull. "I can fly a brick if it has thrusters," Cassian snapped, flipping switches with practiced speed. "Shields up." Eliana closed her eyes. She reached out with her mind, connecting to the ship's primitive computer core. It was nothing like the throne mind. It was simple, rugged, and stubborn. She pushed her own energy into the shield generators, boosting them far beyond their factory specs. The ship lurched. Cassian punched the throttle. The courier ship shot out of the hangar bay, scraping the edges of the atmospheric field, and plunged into the cold vacuum of space. Behind them, the Conclave station looked like an angry star, fleets deploying to intercept. "They are locking onto us," Cassian said, his eyes glued to the sensors. "We cannot outrun a destroyer in open space." "Then where do we go?" Ileana asked, wiping the blood from her lip. Cassian looked at her. He grinned, a manic, terrified expression. "We go where they cannot follow. The needle's eye." He banked the ship hard, diving not toward the safety of open space, but down, toward the debris belt of a nearby gas giant. "Cassian, that is an unstable wormhole cluster," Ileana cried, recognizing the navigational hazard on the screen. "It shreds anything larger than a probe." "And anything slower than a thought," Cassian corrected. "Hold on to something. This is going to get rough." He drove the ship straight into the swirling, chaotic energy of the anomaly. The universe outside the viewport twisted. Starlight bent into ribbons. The ship groaned, metal screaming under the gravitational shear. Cassian fought the stick, his hands moving in a blur. He wasn't relying on the computer. He was flying by instinct, reading the currents of the wormhole like a surfer reading a wave. "Shields are failing," he shouted. Ileana reached out. She didn't just boost the shields. She held the ship together with her will. She felt every rivet popping, every plate buckling, and she held them fast. She screamed, the psychic pressure feeling like it was crushing her skull. Then, with a sound like a thunderclap, the turbulence vanished. The stars settled. They were floating in a quiet, dark sector of space, far from the station. The sensors showed nothing but empty void and distant dust. They had jumped. Cassian slumped back in his chair, exhaling a breath he felt like he had been holding for an hour. "We made it," he whispered. He turned to look at Ileana. She was slumped forward, unconscious, her bioluminescence dimmed to a faint, flickering gray. Days blurred into nights. The courier ship, which the logs identified as the Rust Bucket, a name Cassian refused to change out of superstitious respect, was a tiny metal island in a sea of stars. They were drifting through the fringe systems, a collection of forgotten worlds and asteroid colonies that the Conclave barely acknowledged. They kept the transponder off. They moved in short, calculated jumps to avoid patrols. The ship was small. There was one bunk, a tiny galley, and the cockpit. There was no privacy. There was nowhere to hide from the reality of what they had done. Ileana recovered slowly. The psychic strain had drained her. For the first 2 days, she slept, waking only to drink water and stare blankly at the wall. Cassian tended to her with a quiet, terrified devotion. He fixed the air recyclers. He cooked reconstituted rations, and he watched the scanners, waiting for the hunter-killer drones he knew were coming. On the third night, the tension broke. Cassian was in the cockpit, running a diagnostic on the hyperdrive. He heard a sound from the corridor, a sharp intake of breath, like a sob swallowed before it could escape. He found her in the narrow passage outside the bunk. She was sliding down the wall, her knees pulled up to her chest, her face buried in her hands. She was shaking so hard her shoulders vibrated. "Ileana?" Cassian knelt beside her. She looked up. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with tears. The regal mask was gone. The queen was gone. "I ruined it," she choked out. Her voice was small, broken. "I ruined everything." "No," Cassian said softly. "We escaped. We are safe." "Safe?" She laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. "Cassian, do you know what I saw on the news feed before the signal cut out? The warlord has declared martial law. The directorate has seized the core gates. They are blockading systems. Millions will starve, and it is my fault." She grabbed his shirt, her knuckles white. "I made a selfish choice," she whispered. "I chose you. I chose my own heart over the galaxy, and now the galaxy is burning. I am not a queen. I am just a terrified girl who wanted to be loved, and I destroyed the universe to get it." Cassian did not look away. He took her hands, prying them gently from his shirt, and held them between his own scarred, rough palms. "Listen to me," he said, his voice firm. He waited until she met his eyes. The galaxy was already burning. Eliana. It was burning with slow, cold fire. The warlord, the prince, the council, they were strangling it. They were trading lives for credits and treating people like cattle. You did not break the peace. You broke the lie. He reached up and cupped her face. His thumbs brushed the dampness from her cheeks. "You think your choice was selfish? It was the first honest act I have seen in my entire life. In a universe built on deception, where everyone wears a mask, you stood up and told the truth. You chose love. That is not weakness. That is the only kind of strength that matters." Eliana leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "Is it?" she whispered. "Or is that just what we tell ourselves to survive?" Cassian leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "I do not know about the universe," he murmured, "but I know about me. I know that I would burn 1,000 stars just to keep you safe." The air in the narrow corridor shifted. The despair began to curdle into something else, something hot, desperate, and inevitable. Eliana opened her eyes. They were silver, swirling with a storm of emotion. She looked at his lips, then up to his eyes. "Do you want me?" she asked. Her voice was raw, stripped of all pretense. Not the queen, not the prize, just this, the mess on the floor. Cassian looked at her. He saw the bruises on her arms. He saw the fear in her soul. He saw the woman who had laughed at his bad jokes and danced with him in the face of death. "I fell in love with the mess," he whispered. "I fell in love with a woman who has too many nightmares and cold hands. I want you, Eliana, every broken, beautiful part of you." She made a sound, a soft, broken whimper, and surged forward. Their mouths met. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision of relief and hunger. It was the desperate need to prove that they were still alive, still real, still together. They moved blindly into the small bunk room. The door hissed shut, locking the universe out. In the dark of the ship, stripped of robes and uniforms, there was no rank. There was only skin and heat. Eliana's bioluminescence flared, painting the room in soft, pulsing waves of violet and blue, casting shadows that danced on the metal walls. She traced the scars on his chest with trembling fingers, mapping the history of his pain. He kissed the glowing patterns on her neck, worshipping the alien beauty she had always been told was a tool of statecraft. They whispered confessions into the skin of the other. She told him about the loneliness of the throne, the cold silence of her childhood. He told her about the guilt of the war, the feeling of being a cog in a machine. They stripped each other bare, not just physically but emotionally. There were tears mixed with the kisses. There was laughter, breathless and surprised, when they tangled in the sheets, and there was a profound, overwhelming sense of homecoming. For the first time in her life, Eliana was not a key, or a symbol, or a duty. She was just a woman, held in the arms of a man who looked at her with wonder. And for Cassian, the galaxy shrank down to the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against his chest, a sound louder than any war. The next morning, the ship felt different. The air was lighter. Cassian sat in the pilot's chair, nursing a cup of coffee. Eliana walked in. She was wearing one of his spare shirts, which hung loosely on her frame, and she was barefoot. She looked rested, the shadows under her eyes gone. Morning, mechanic, she said, leaning against the doorframe. Morning, Your Majesty, he replied, not looking up from the console, but a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. She walked over and swiveled his chair around. She straddled his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. It was a casual, possessive intimacy that felt like they had been doing it for years. No titles, she murmured, resting her chin on his head. Not out here. We need a plan, Cassian said, his hands resting on her waist. We cannot run forever. The fuel cells are at 40%. I know, she sighed. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the stars drift by. Last night, Eliana said quietly, I realized something. What? We cannot just hide. If we hide, we let them win. We let them turn our love into a dirty secret. She pulled back to look at him. I would rather lose everything than go back to being a bargaining chip, Cassian. But I also cannot let millions suffer because I wanted to be free. Our love, it has to be powerful enough to change things, or it is not worth the cost. Cassian nodded slowly. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I am not going to be your shield, Eliana. I am done protecting you from the world. Eliana blinked, hurt flashing in her eyes. What? I'm going to be your partner, he corrected. A shield just takes the hits. A partner hits back. And I promise you this, I will not just follow you. I will tell you when you are wrong. I will challenge you, because that is what equals do. Eliana smiled, and her light pulsed a warm, steady gold. I would expect nothing less. They turned the ship toward the fringe. The weeks that followed were a montage of dust, danger, and discovery. They landed on worlds that had fallen off the star charts. Mining colonies dug into asteroids, agricultural moons choked by terraforming smog, salvage yards run by sentient droids. On the moon of Kessel 5, they walked into a cantina filled with methane breathers and hardened miners. The air was thick with smoke. When Eliana walked in, wearing Cassian's spare jumpsuit but moving like a queen, the room went silent. A massive, four-armed miner slammed his tankard down. It is her, he growled, the runaway queen. Cassian stepped forward, his hand drifting to his stun baton. Easy, big guy. The miner ignored him. He glared at Eliana. My brother died on the blockade line 3 days ago. Because the directorate shut down the medical shipments. Because of you. Eliana did not flinch. She did not hide behind Cassian. She walked right up to the massive alien until she was looking up at his tusks. I am sorry, she said. Her voice was clear, ringing with sincerity. I failed you. My rule was distant. I let the council rot the foundation of the galaxy while I sat in a tower. I am sorry for your brother, and I am here to make sure no one else dies for my mistakes. The miner stared at her. He had expected excuses. He had expected royal arrogance. He did not expect an apology. He grunted. You got a ship? A small one, Cassian piped up. We got guns, the miner said, and we hate the directorate. It happened everywhere they went. Cassian, with his rough accent and his mechanic's hands, connected with the people. He fixed their vaporators. He drank their rot gut liquor. He told jokes about the high and mighty warlords. And Eliana listened. She sat by fire pits and listened to the stories of mothers who had lost sons to the wars, of farmers taxed into starvation. She touched them, healing their minor wounds with her light, not as a miracle worker, but as a neighbor. They gathered a strange ragtag fleet, a squadron of pirate fighters led by a Twi'lek ace, a collective of rebel AIs who inhabited a swarm of mining drones, a battalion of disgraced soldiers who had served with Cassian in the old wars. There was humor in the hardship. Cassian tried to teach Eliana how to cook ration packs over an open heater coil. She ended up burning the meal and laughing until she hiccuped. They bickered over his aggressive piloting style. "You fly like you are angry at the vacuum," she teased one day as he corkscrewed through an asteroid field. "I fly like I want to live," he retorted, grinning as he pulled a high G-turn that pinned them to their seats. There were moments of open, tender affection. He would pull her into his lap while checking the nav charts. She would rest her head on his shoulder while he slept, her light serving as his nightlight. They were no longer running. They were building. The breakthrough came on a listening post orbiting a dead star. The rebel AI collective had cracked the encryption on a directorate transmission. Cassian and Eliana stood over the console, watching the data scroll by. "It is worse than we thought," Cassian muttered. "Look at this." The schematic showed the Stargate network, but it was being reconfigured. The Directorate was installing override shunts on every major gate. They are not just blockading, Eliana realized, horror dawning on her face. They are centralizing the entire network. If they activate this, they can cut off any system instantly. They can starve a planet in a week. They can prevent any fleet from moving, so it is a cage, a galaxy-sized cage. And look at the timestamp. Cassian pointed. The activation sequence is keyed to the throne. They need the psychic residue of a coronation to lock it in. "They are going to crown a puppet," Eliana whispered. "Warlord Kalen. If he sits on the throne and bonds with the network, even partially, he can flip the switch." She looked at Cassian. "We have to go back." Cassian looked at the data. He looked at the fleet of pirate ships and mining barges gathering outside. It was a suicide mission. The Conclave station was a fortress. "If we go back," he said quietly, "they will try to kill us. And this time, there will be no service corridors to hide in." "I know," Eliana said. She turned to him. "But if we don't, then everything we found out here, the freedom, the honesty, us, it dies. It becomes a memory in a prison." Cassian sighed. He reached out and took her hand. "Well," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I always said I wanted to fix the galaxy. I guess we have to break it a little bit more first." The night before the return, they parked the rust bucket on the edge of a quiet asteroid field, waiting for the fleet to muster. They stood at the viewport, looking out at the stars. The reflection of Eliana's skin made it look like the constellations were dancing on her face. They were dressed for war. Eliana wore a suit of scavenged armor, painted white, with her cloak thrown over it. Cassian wore his old infantry flak jacket, his stun baton replaced by a heavy blaster pistol strapped to his thigh. They held hands. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of everything they had survived. "You know," Cassian said softly, "they are going to call us monsters, the usurper and the traitor." "Let them talk," Eliana replied. "History is written by the people who show up." She squeezed his hand. "If we fail, Cassian, if we die tomorrow, they will say our love destroyed the galaxy." Cassian turned to her. He kissed her forehead, then her lips, lingering there for a moment before pulling back to look her in the eye. "Then let's make sure they also say it's what saved it." He turned to the comms panel. "All ships. This is Cassian Ward. Lock S foils in attack position. We are going to a wedding." He pushed the throttle forward. The courier ship, flanked by the ragtag armada of the Free Galaxy, punched into hyperspace, racing back toward the heart of the fire. The Conclave station hung in the void like a jewel that had begun to rot from the inside. The once bright navigational beacons were dimmed to a harsh, military red. Patrol skiffs swarmed the perimeter in a dense, angry grid, scanning every particle of dust that dared to drift too close to the royal sector. Inside the cockpit of the rust bucket, the air was thick with tension and the smell of burning capacitors. Cassian Ward's hands flew across the control board, his fingers dancing over the worn switches. "Shield harmonics at 90%, he muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. The rebel AI collective came through. "These codes are ghosting us right past the perimeter sensors. To the station grid, we look like a garbage scow scheduled for incineration." Ileana sat in the co-pilot seat, her eyes closed, her temples throbbing. She was not flying the ship, she was shielding it. She had cast a psychic veil over their mental signatures, a technique that felt like holding her breath while running a marathon. "Are we in?" she whispered, not opening her eyes. "We are in," Cassian confirmed. "Docking Bay 42. It is decommissioned. The Twi'lek ace said her people jammed the door override." The ship shuddered as it touched down on the rusted deck, the clamps engaged with a metallic groan. Ileana exhaled, opening her eyes. The violet light of her bioluminescence was faint, flickering with exhaustion. "We are back," she said, staring at the airlock. Cassian unbuckled his harness. He checked the charge on his heavy blaster pistol and the stun baton strapped to his thigh. He looked at her, his dark eyes serious. "Once we step off this ship, Ileana, there is no running. If we fail, we do not get to steal another courier." "I know," she said, standing up and smoothing the scavenged white armor she wore beneath her cloak. She reached out and took his hand. "I am done running. Cassian, let's go make some noise." The station was in a state of terrified lockdown. Holographic screens on every bulkhead blared the same loop of propaganda. It showed Warlord Kalen standing on the council podium, flanked by Councillor Varric. "The traitor queen has been compromised." The broadcast boomed. "Her mind has been twisted by human insurrectionists. For the safety of the Gate network, the Directorate has assumed temporary control." Cassian and Ileana moved through the shadows of the maintenance levels, guided by the schematics Cassian knew better than the back of his hand. They weren't alone. From the vents and service hatches, allies emerged, disgruntled technicians, sympathetic guards who had turned their coats, and droids repainted with the symbol of the Resistance. "We need the broadcasting core," Ileana told the small group gathered in a steam tunnel. "If we walk into the council chamber now, they will just shoot us and tell the galaxy we died resisting arrest. We need eyes on us. We need the truth to be unkillable." "I can get you into the core," a young Celestin technician piped up. "But the firewalls are military grade." Cassian grinned, patting the data spike on his belt. "Do not worry about the firewalls. We brought a key." The assault on the broadcasting core was silent and swift. Cassian's team disabled the guards with stun rounds before they could raise the alarm. Cassian jacked the rebel AI code into the central server. The screen flashed red, then green. "We are live in 5 minutes," Cassian said, turning to Ileana. "Every screen from here to the rim is going to override." Ileana nodded. She closed her eyes, centering herself. She was not just preparing to speak. She was preparing to fight. The council chamber was sealed. The heavy obsidian doors were locked. Inside, the air was stale with the smell of fear and recycled ambition. Warlord Kalen sat in Ileana's chair, not the throne itself, which rejected him, but a temporary command seat installed in front of it. Councillor Varric stood by his side, looking pale. Ambassador Sile, the cybernetic diplomat, sat motionless, his optical sensors whirring. "We must initiate the coronation sequence immediately," Varric urged. The public unrest is growing, and if we do not crown a regent, the markets will crash. Kalen grunted. The throne resists me. It burns when I touch it. It requires a catalyst. Sile intoned, his voice a synthetic drone. We must purge the Queen's biometric data from the system. It will require a hard reset of the ancient tech. It carries a 30% risk of gate collapse. Do it, Kalen ordered. Before Sile could move, the obsidian doors did not open. They exploded. The blast was precise, shaped charges blowing the hinges inward. Smoke billowed into the pristine chamber. Through the haze walked two figures. Queen Eliana strode forward, her white armor gleaming, her cloak billowing like smoke. Beside her walked Cassian Ward, weapon drawn, looking less like a mechanic and more like a king of the underworld. Stop, Kalen roared, leaping to his feet. Guards! Kill them! The elite guard raised their weapons, but they hesitated. Look at the screens, Eliana's voice rang out, amplified by her psychic resonance. The counselors turned. The massive wall screens, which usually displayed star charts, were now showing a live feed of the room they were standing in. But it wasn't just in the room. It is broadcasting. Varric gasped, checking his data slate. By the stars. It is everywhere. Every ship, every planet. I invoke the code of the first sun, Eliana shouted, pointing a finger at the council. I invoke the right of universal witness. It was an ancient law, one written in the bedrock of the conclave's founding, forgotten by men who preferred loopholes. It stated that a challenge to the throne made in the presence of the galaxy could not be silenced by violence without forfeiting the attacker's legitimacy. Kalen froze. If he fired now, on live feed, he would not be a regent, he would be a butcher. The galaxy would revolt. You have no power here. Fallen queen, Varric hissed, stepping forward. You abandoned your post to run away with a savage. I did not run, Eliana said, stepping onto the central dais. I went to find the truth you buried. She gestured to Cassian. Show them. Cassian stepped forward. He threw a data puck onto the obsidian table. It projected a hologram into the air, a three-dimensional web of evidence. This is the flight telemetry from the drones that attacked the Queen on Orifer, Cassian said, his voice steady. You blamed the rebels, but the signal trace leads directly to Ambassador Sile's personal server. The hologram shifted. This is the maintenance log for the gravity sphere, Cassian continued. The safeties were disabled manually using Counselor Varric's biometric key. Murmurs broke out among the delegates. Varric turned white. And this, Cassian said, pointing to a stream of financial data, is the Directorate's plan, a centralized override of the Stargate network, a toll booth on every jump, a cage for every world. Lies, Kalen shouted, drawing his gravity blade. This is a fabrication by a desperate criminal. Eliana stepped between Cassian and the warlord. She looked into the camera drone hovering above them, addressing the trillions watching across the stars. I admit my crime, she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a thunderclap. My crime was silence. For 10 years, I let this council treat marriage like a weapon. I let them treat my body as currency and your freedom as a bargaining chip. I sat on a throne and let them build a prison around us all, because I was told it was the price of peace. She looked at Cassian, then back to the galaxy. I will no longer be the galaxy's prettiest prison door. Leadership is not about bloodlines. It is not about who has the biggest fleet or the purest DNA. It is about empathy. It is about accountability. It is about the courage to serve the people, not sell them. Cassian stepped up beside her. He holstered his weapon, making a choice to speak as a man, not a soldier. They call me a savage, Cassian said. They call me a Tier 3 labor unit. They say a human cannot stand beside a queen. He looked at Kalen, his eyes hard. I was a soldier once. I was ordered to fire on civilians to secure a strategic asset. My superiors told me that duty meant obedience. They told me that power justifies the cost. He shook his head. I learned that day that the highest loyalty is the ability to say no. No to the slaughter. No to the greed. No to the idea that some species are born to rule and others are born to kneel. Courage does not have a genetic code. Compassion is not a mutation. He took Eliana's hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. We are not asking for your permission to lead. We are asking you to stop following the men who want to enslave you. The silence in the chamber was absolute. On 1,000 worlds, people were watching, holding their breath. Then, Ambassador Sile moved. Sentiment is inefficient, the cyborg stated coldly. The broadcast is irrelevant. The plan proceeds. Sile's eyes flashed red. He didn't use a weapon. He interfaced directly with the station's core. Security override Omega, he commanded. The station screamed. Red alert sirens began to wail. The blast doors slammed shut, locking the council chamber. The ceremonial armor suits lining the walls, hundreds of them activated. Their visors glowed a lethal crimson. Kill them all, Sile ordered. Chaos erupted. The warlord's guards opened fire on the drones, realizing too late that the machines were targeting everyone. Varric screamed as a plasma bolt incinerated the table in front of him. Cassian tackled Eliana, rolling her behind the heavy dais as the air filled with laser fire. He is locking down the core, Eliana shouted over the roar. If Sile completes the sequence, the station will vent the atmosphere. He is going to kill everyone to stop us. We have to get to the throne, Cassian yelled, firing blindly over the dais to suppress the advancing machines. The ancient tech is the only thing that overrides the station mainframe. They moved. It was a desperate, rolling gunfight. Cassian took point, his blaster spitting blue fire, dismantling the automated suits with precise shots to their power cores. Eliana was a whirlwind of psychic energy. She shielded them from the heavy fire, deflecting plasma bolts with waves of force, her nose bleeding freely now. They reached the inner sanctum. The throne of Lumeris sat on a raised platform, a massive structure of crystalline geometry that pulsed with a dormant heartbeat. Sile stood between them and the throne. The cyborg had detached from his hover chassis, revealing a spider-like combat frame. You are obsolete, Sile intoned, raising an arm-mounted cannon. Eliana didn't hesitate. She screamed, unleashing a psychic blast of pure agony. She projected the pain of every person the Directorate had hurt directly into Sile's biological components. The cyborg twitched, his logic processors overwhelmed by the flood of raw emotion. Cassian saw the opening. He didn't shoot the cyborg. He shot the cooling tank on the wall behind him. Liquid nitrogen sprayed out, freezing Sile's joints instantly. With a final, desperate lunge, Cassian slammed his baton into the cyborg's central processor. Sile collapsed, a frozen statue of metal and malice. The station shook violently. Self-destruct sequence initiated, the computer voice announced. 2 minutes to total containment failure. Eliana scrambled up the steps to the throne. She threw herself into the seat. The crystal spires lit up, piercing her skin with interface needles. She screamed as the connection took hold. It was too much. The ancient AI was awake, and it was angry. Unauthorized access. The voice boomed in her head, and in the room, system compromised. Initiating purge. Stop! Eliana cried, her mind battling the ancient intelligence. You cannot purge the station. There are millions of lives. Order is required, the AI countered. The biologicals are chaotic. The network must be preserved. It offered her a bargain. Merge with me. Become the eternal anchor. Shed the flesh. Rule as pure consciousness. Only then can the chaos be stabilized. Eliana gasped. It was asking her to die, to become a ghost in the machine, ruling forever but feeling nothing. I cannot. She wept. I will not sacrifice my humanity. Then the system falls. Cassian ran up the steps. He saw Eliana arching in pain, her light flickering out. Eliana. He grabbed her hand. She looked at him. Her eyes silver mirrors. It wants an anchor. Cassian, it wants a life. It won't listen to me alone. It needs balance. A human? The AI's voice sneered, vibrating the very air. A Tier 3 primitive? Unworthy. Incompatible. Cassian looked at the swirling energy of the throne. He didn't see a god. He saw a machine that needed fixing. I am not a primitive, Cassian snarled, gripping Eliana's hand tighter. And I am not just a human. I am her partner. He stepped onto the dais. He didn't ask for permission. He placed his free hand on the interface crystal. Take me, he commanded. Warning. Neural overload imminent. 2 minds cannot occupy the nexus. Watch us, Cassian said. He looked at Eliana. Together? Together, she whispered. They closed their eyes. The world dissolved into white fire. It was a cinematic explosion of memory and sensation. They were no longer in the room. They were in the stream. Eliana felt Cassian's life, the mud of Ferris 4, the grease on his hands, the shame of the collar, the fierce burning pride when he looked at her. Cassian felt Eliana's life, the cold silence of the palace, the weight of the crown, the terror of the assassination, the overwhelming warmth when he held her in the cave. The AI tried to tear them apart, to categorize them as separate data points. But the bond between them was not data. It was something the ancient builders had not accounted for. It was love, messy and illogical and stronger than any algorithm. They relived the moment in the elevator, the spark of humor, integration 20%. They relived the jump into the wormhole, the shared trust, integration 50%. They relived the night on the courier ship, the vulnerability, the surrender, the vow to change the galaxy, integration 100%, harmony achieved. The AI paused. It analyzed the new input. It saw not weakness, but a dual-core processor of infinite adaptability. 1 mind for logic and structure, 1 mind for intuition and empathy. Paradigm accepted. The AI boomed, rewriting network protocols. On the station, the red alert lights shattered. A pulse of pure golden energy swept out from the throne room. It passed through the walls, through the ships, through the vacuum. The defense drones deactivated, dropping harmlessly to the deck. The countdown stopped. The Stargate network, which had been glowing an angry red, shifted. The colors bled into a spectrum of soft, inviting gold. The lockouts lifted. The toll booths dissolved. In the throne room, the light faded. Eliana and Cassian slumped forward, still holding hands, gasping for air. They were alive. They were still flesh and blood, but they could feel the hum of the galaxy in the back of their minds, a gentle, rhythmic song that waited for their command. The aftermath was not a parade. It was a cleanup. Warlord Kalen was arrested by his own lieutenants, who had seen the broadcast and realized their leader was willing to sacrifice them for a chair. Counselor Varric attempted to flee but was apprehended by the kitchen staff in the lower docks. The galaxy did not burn. It breathed. 3 weeks later, the Great Hall was repaired. The scorch marks were gone, but the atmosphere had changed. The floating platforms were lowered to the floor. The barriers between the nobility and the commoners were removed. Eliana stood at a podium, not a throne. Cassian stood beside her. wearing a simple suit that matched hers. No crowns, no robes. They presented the new charter. The Gate Network is no longer the property of Lumeris, Eliana announced to the delegates of 1,000 worlds. It is a public trust. No single species may control more than 10% of the transit nodes, Cassian added. Reading from the slate, travel rights are universal, and marriage. He looked at Eliana, a smile tugging at his lips. Marriage is a personal choice, not a treaty. The applause was not polite, it was raucous. It was the sound of a galaxy realizing that the cage door was open. That evening, the celebration was in full swing, but Eliana and Cassian slipped away. They stood on a private balcony overlooking the repaired station. The nebula swirled below them, painting the dark in hues of purple and gold. Eliana leaned against the railing, holding a glass of cheap synthetic wine, Cassian's favorite. You know, she said, nudging him with her shoulder. The royal historians are having a breakdown. They do not know how to title you. Consort? King? Prime Mechanic? I like Prime Mechanic, Cassian mused, looking out at the stars. Sounds like I get to charge extra for overtime. Eliana laughed. She turned to face him, setting the glass down. You realized you married below your station, she teased gently. I am technically unemployed now that I gave the network away. Cassian stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her waist. I did not marry below my station, he said, his voice dropping to that low rumble that always made her shiver. I upgraded. I went from fixing engines to fixing galaxies. The pay is terrible, but the benefits. He kissed her. It was slow, deep, and full of a quiet, unshakable peace. There was no desperation in it anymore, no fear of discovery. Just the comfortable, solid weight of a future they had built with their own hands. When they pulled apart, Eliana rested her head on his chest. I am still afraid sometimes, she confessed softly. I feel like the galaxy is staring at us, waiting for us to fail. Cassian tightened his hold on her. Let them stare, he said. As long as you keep choosing me, Eliana, I do not care who is watching. Eliana looked up at him. She saw the scar on his eyebrow, the gray in his hair, the love in his eyes. I will always choose you, she whispered. The final broadcast went out the next morning. It wasn't a speech. It was a departure. Eliana stood before the camera, Cassian at her side. True power is not being desired by the entire galaxy, she said, her voice carrying the wisdom of the journey. It is not about armies or gates. True power is having the courage to choose one honest heart and to build something better with it. The image cut to a wide shot. They were standing in front of the massive Stargate ring in the central plaza. It was active, the event horizon swirling with light. They were not running away. They were carrying backpacks, and they looked like travelers. Looked. Where are we going? Cassian asked, his voice audible on the feed. Everywhere, Eliana replied. She reached out and took his hand, their fingers intertwined, the pale, luminous hand of the queen and the scarred, rough hand of the mechanic. Together, they stepped forward. They walked into the light of the Stargate, not as rulers, but as explorers. They stepped into the galaxy they had saved, side by side, ready to see what lay beyond the map. The screen faded to white, leaving only the image of two silhouettes, hand in hand, disappearing into the stars.